Chapter 295. After all, the blue dragons were on the verge of extinction, and if the blue dragon king found out, Antonidas would definitely be in huge trouble. Xueqi nodded seriously before he continued. It's not impossible for you to fuse Phoenix Flames and Crown of Ice, these two top-level circuits, but it means that you're taking a path that's 100 times more difficult than mine. Not only do you need the 4 types of souls, ice and fire, but you also need to strengthen your arcane circuit, which means that you need 6 rare souls to ascend to Breaking Dawn. Xueqi curled his lips and didn't say anything. He was still holding the tip of an artifact magic staff Atish, the legendary staff of the Guardian, in his hand. If he was still that black in this life, he would have to collect 41 fragments of the artifact magic staff. Compared to this kind of unreliable collection, elemental souls with a clear direction and even substitutes were nothing. Of course, Xueqi was still a little envious of Medivh. Medivh, who became a demigod mage and triple virtue pharaoh almost effortlessly, clearly had a good mother. Who was Egwin? The former world guardian, the awesome person who fought alongside the 4-colored dragons and abused demons all day long. Antonidas had to tremble in fear when dealing with a blue dragon king, but if it was Egwin, a big shot would speak up with just one word. The blue dragon king would probably sacrifice his soul even if he committed suicide. Speaking of which, whether he liked it or not was another matter. Seeing Xueqi's unmoved appearance, Antonidas even had the illusion that he was old. These were two different things. This time, Xueqi had helped him clean up his own faction and saved Dalaran from losing a huge amount of reputation. He still had to repay this favor. Antonidas continued, "Perhaps your path is the broadest. Since you've chosen, I won't say anything. However, the magic circuit I pass on to you is still easy for outsiders to see. You have to pretend." Xueqi understood on the spot. "Oh, I'll deliver 10,000 top-level magic books to the Dalaran." Antonidas rolled his eyes. What the F***CK? Top class? It was obvious that he was using those inferior magic books to fool people again. The old speaker was a little angry. "Don't go too far." "All right, 100 Morningstar books and 10 Radiant Moon books," Xueqi added. "Announce to the public that there are 1,000 Morningstar and 100 Radiant Moon magic tomes among the 10,000. Just like that, the old fox and the young fox reached an agreement. "Okay, I'll give you this Arcane Light magic circuit model." When Antonidas transmitted the magic model to Xueqi, Xueqi wasn't surprised by the magic model's wonders. "Congratulations, host. Antonidas is willing to give you the top-notch arcane magic circuit, Arcane Throne, with a completion rate of 82%. Recalling that his other circuit was called the Crown of Ice, Xueqi suddenly felt a headache coming on. He finally understood why Antonidas was so stubborn in his old age. It turned out that this guy thought of himself as the king of the magical realm. Alright, in any case, it was the Dalaran that he was screwing over. Xueqi decided to make a fortune in silence. The greatest king system was not good at creating something out of nothing, but it was perfect at correcting errors. In the state guest house in Dalaran, with the basic model as a comparison, Xueqi only spent one night to obtain a perfect version of the circuit of Arcane Throne. After thousands of simulations by the system, Xueqi decided to advance in the Dalaran. Xueqi had already completed the most crucial energy absorption in Karazhan. Now, he only needed to make minor adjustments, which did not matter much in the Dalaran. A complete version of a top-notch product was indeed different. The moment Xueqi embedded the Arcane Throne, which was 2 sizes larger, into Phoenix Flames and Crown of Ice, the combination of 1 big and 2 small circuits immediately gave Xueqi a different kind of spiritual impact. There was a brief buzzing in his ears, and his vision blurred for a moment. However, Xueqi was certain that he had indeed felt the existence of the laws of heaven and earth at this moment. Even he did not realize what had happened. The moment he embedded the Arcane Throne, an incomparably profound and complex magic operation knowledge came back from the 3 circuits. In that instant, he seemed to understand the meaning of Morningstar, but this happened in less than 1,000th of a second. It was as if in that instant, he had lost his identity as a human. He was no longer a human. Instead, he was a sun that emitted blazing light, a real shining star. The magic energy that escaped from Xueqi's body instantly rushed out of Xueqi's body like a hurricane from a jet engine, easily sweeping everything in the room. It burst the window and flew through the door, scaring Gavin, Rad and Windsor, who were guarding the door. They took advantage of the gap in the arcane storm to poke their heads into the room. Xueqi raised his head and met their gazes. They were surprised to find that Xueqi's eyes were no longer deep black. In those small black eyes, countless mysterious magic arrays were reflected. These arrays were constantly changing and combining, as if they were corresponding to the formal integration of the 3 magic circuits in his body. Duke's vision had completely changed. He no longer saw the decorations in the room, and he no longer saw his 2 powerful paladin bodyguards. He no longer saw the earth and the sky, and he no longer saw anything that was material. Instead, it was a world full of energy. There was no substance, only energy. It represented the Violet Fortress with a high concentration of energy. It represented the higher energy level of Antonida's laboratory. There was also the Dalajan sky, which was slightly thinner in energy compared to them. The boundless sky, the vast land, everything paled in comparison to the bright star that was Xueqi. Xueqi gently closed his eyes. Every breath he took caused his body to undergo a miraculous change. The hot air that surged into his lungs was instantly absorbed by the small alveoli in his lungs. All the oxygen entered his blood vessels and was quickly transported to the magic circuit that existed in his body in the form of the second dimension. It became nourishment, stimulating the magic in the circuit to rapidly fission. It provided all the magic that Xueqi needed to cast spells. Xueqi suddenly laughed bitterly. No wonder Sky Magi and Morning Star Magi were a very, very important dividing line in the world of Magi. This was in no way inferior to the advancement of ordinary Magi. Previously, Earth and Sky Magi were said to have transported energy from the outside world to meet the needs of casting spells. Then above Morning Star, it was a classic mix of magic. It could be absorbed from the outside world or created by oneself. From a transmigrator's point of view, before Morning Star, it was a conventional aircraft carrier that needed a lot of fuel to operate. After Morning Star, it would be upgraded to a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Even though many things were needed, there was no need to worry about energy. Chapter 296. In a sense, Xueqi was now carrying a nuclear reactor for human use. No matter what, Xueqi had taken a very important step in the field of magic. The moment Xueqi advanced, the entire Dalajan was in an uproar. Who's advancing? This mana is ridiculous. Which Morning Star Master has finally stepped onto the path of Radiant Moon? The cries of the acolytes and low-ranked wizards were unreliable. The high-ranked wizards did not look too good. Many high-ranked wizards had experienced the process of transforming ordinary elemental power into pure Morning Star mana. This was definitely the first time the amount of mana was so ridiculous. Comparable to Grandmaster Antonida's? No. It's even more ridiculous than the chairman. Perhaps only the legendary protector Medivh would have such a terrifying momentum when he advanced. Yes, back then I was studying in the Elven Forest, and I actually felt an explosion of mana from Karazhan that was more than 100 kilometers away. That momentum was similar to this person right now. My God, this is at least the mana of 100 ordinary Morning Star wizards, right? Then, who is it? Feeling the arcane energy storm that was spilling out of his body gradually stop and the surging mana circulating normally in his body, Xueqi really wanted to laugh wildly for a minute. The system notifications kept appearing. As you have obtained the top-notch arcane magic circuit, Arcane Throne, you have obtained all strengthened arcane metamagic specialties by default. You have obtained the metamagic specialization, Arcane Concentration. The chances of enemies resisting your arcane magic are reduced by 30%. You have obtained the metamagic specialization, Arcane Focus. When you cast any spell, there is a 33% chance that you will enter a spell-saving state. In this state, the mana consumption of your next damaging spell will be reduced by 100%. You have obtained the top-notch metamagic specialization, Arcane Energy Storm. After activation, your spell damage will be increased by 100% and your mana consumption will be increased by 50%. Lasts for 30 seconds. After each use, you have to wait for 5 minutes for your arcane magic circuit to calm down, or else there is a possibility of the circuit collapsing. As you have obtained the top-level frost magic circuit, Crown of Ice, you have obtained all enhanced frost metamagic abilities by default. You have obtained the metamagic ability, Rapid Cooldown. You have obtained the metamagic ability, Ice Barrier. Of course, there was also the fire metamagic ability that Phoenix Flames gave him. The metamagic specialties of all 3 schools almost dazzled Xueqi. Now that Medivh had passed away and Khadgar had become a ghost, Xueqi could say without any exaggeration that he was the only high-ranked triple cultivator pharaoh in the world. With a thought, 3 magic orbs of each element appeared behind Duke. There were 3 magic orbs of each element. A crimson ball of fire, a pure white ball of ice, and a purplish-blue ball of arcane magic. All 3 types of balls were moving in a triangular pattern on Xueqi's back. There were exactly 9 balls occupying a 360-degree position around Xueqi, and each ball was 40 degrees. Outside the state guesthouse, all 5 members of the Kirin Tor Council had arrived, including Archbishop Fail and Uther. Everyone applauded in unison. "Congratulations, Xueqi." Antonida's smile was a little forced. "You really are a genius." Croesus congratulated him sincerely. "Congratulations, but... Xueqi, are you really not targeting me?" That smile was a little strange because there were 3 yellow-green arcane flames circling above his head. This was already that's trademark. Now that that's had 3 and Xueqi had 9, it was a little embarrassing no matter how one looked at it. No, that's... You should be my master in this aspect. I found that you can better train your ability to manipulate the elements by doing this. So please don't be offended, I couldn't help but learn it. In the future, I'll tell everyone I meet that I learned from you, okay? Xueqi very sincerely used the special skill hypocrisy to cover up his actions that were purely pretentious. All of a sudden, even was moved. No, I'm too ashamed to say that. Speaking of which, I'm a little biased. That's frowned, and in the next moment, 3 arcane energy balls appeared behind him. However, these 3 energy balls looked weaker than his fire elemental balls. Xueqi blinked. That seemed a little embarrassed. "I'm sorry, it seems that I've neglected the cultivation of the arcane. The training of the arcane circuit can indeed make my flame circuit stronger. You've woken me up." At this moment, Jaina arrived. "Congratulations, Brother Xueqi." Jaina's words were very sweet. "Thank you." Xueqi smiled slightly. No matter where one was, a beautiful woman was always a beautiful scenery. This time, the moment she saw the 9 energy balls behind Xueqi, Jaina could no longer look away. Because she saw an existence that broke her common sense and saw an even more powerful possibility. For some reason, looking at Xueqi, who had successfully cultivated 3 paths of cultivation, she felt her heart palpitate. It was not that she had fallen in love with Xueqi, but that she had fallen in love with the power of the 3 paths of cultivation. However, Jaina kept this desire in the bottom of her heart, because she knew very well that it was not easy to obtain the magic circuit model of these 3 paths of cultivation. Getting the details of the fine-tuning circuit was a secret of all mages. Originally, in her imagination, Antonida's was already the strongest in her heart, and the only ultimate existence that was qualified for her to become his disciple. Now, her thoughts were a little shaken. Antonida's walked over and patted Xueqi's shoulder. "In any case, congratulations, Xueqi. You can now proudly hold the title of master. However, because of your advancement, you neglected the mages you took with you. If they come to apply for contract arbitration, I won't help you." What he meant was, "Kid, have you reaped enough benefits? If you've reaped enough benefits, get lost. Don't be an eyesore here." Xueqi smiled bitterly. He quickly bid farewell to the Dalajan people and rushed back to South Shore. Xueqi was busy with his advancement and had not been seen for 2 whole months. Not only that, but because Xueqi was not around, everyone could not open the teleportation portal to Karazhan. This caused the mages who came because of his reputation to complain a lot. The bitter Alucia had no choice but to comfort everyone as Xueqi's assistant, promising that when Xueqi returned, all sorts of benefits and lessons would be made up for. If Xueqi did not have the title of Deputy Commander of the Alliance, there would have been many mages who would have complained to Antonidas that Xueqi had not fulfilled his end of the contract, and would apply to cancel it. All the grumbles disappeared without a trace as Xueqi appeared in front of everyone with the halo of a morning star wizard and 9 energy balls hovering behind him. Chapter 297. What kind of joke was this? A 16-year-old morning star wizard? Just the abundant and terrifying undulations alone were enough to kill most morning star wizards in an instant. Xueqi was only a first-rank morning star wizard. That was not to mention that Xueqi was a super pharaoh who specialized in fire, ice, and arcane magic. Only an idiot would not cling to such an exaggerated golden thigh. The few fellows who had been the most rowdy ran to Alucia, begging for the forgiveness of the noble lady of the Berev family. As long as she did not tell on them, everything would be fine. No matter how good-tempered Alucia was, she was not a pushover. She bore the resentful gazes of those fellows and truthfully told Xueqi everything that had happened in the past 2 months. Xueqi used his Mediva's moral integrity to activate hypocrisy, and said, "Oh, it's all right. This is human nature. It's my fault. My mistake has delayed everyone's studies. I will try my best to make it up to everyone. If everyone feels that it is unreasonable, I am willing to cancel the contract. Don't worry, there will be sufficient compensation." Of course, it was a different matter in his heart. "You dare look down on me for causing trouble? Don't leave if you dare. I promise to send you to the safest place on the battlefield." Those fellows were just saying it with their mouths. They did not leave before, and they would not leave now. If they had no confidence in Xueqi, they would not have chosen to come. Those who came were poor acolytes or beginner wizards who did not have enough funds. As the saying goes, when the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. As long as the towering tree that was Xueqi did not fall, no one would be able to cause any trouble. Moreover, Xueqi had not fallen, but had become even more imposing and exaggerated. After Xueqi gave a few lectures and privately guided a few official wizards, all their resentment disappeared. With the arrival of spring, the Great War was about to begin. The orcs who had been dormant for an entire winter did not weaken their fighting spirit. On the contrary, their fighting spirit was even more vigorous. Glory and land were what the tribes desired. The orcs were never satisfied with these 2 things. After receiving reports from the spies and the dwarves from Iron Forge, the entire alliance went into a state of alert. That was because the beast men who were migrating south during the winter were gradually moving towards the wetlands. The orc laborers who had not left during the winter had begun to build ships again. In the capital of the Rotterdam Kingdom, Lothar presided over the first high-level meeting of the Alliance of Darkness in 2 years. The number of participants was very high, and the kings of the various kingdoms were all present. Taking advantage of the fact that the orc ships had not sealed off the sea, the dwarf prince Magni Bronzebeard once again came to the Rotterdam Kingdom. Thanks to the reduced activity of the beast men during the winter, Xueqi used his own fleet to transport many batches of supplies to the Iron Furnace Castle. The bronze-bearded dwarves of Iron Furnace Castle had a much better life. The dwarves' underground warfare wasn't something that the other tall races could handle, so there was no point in sending reinforcements. Xueqi's act of tightening his belt and providing medicine and food warmed the dwarves' hearts even more. So when he came to Magni Lordaeron and saw Xueqi, he used the most direct way to express his enthusiasm. He used his dwarven strength to bend Xueqi's waist, and gave Xueqi a bear hug. "Ugh, Magni, that's enough. I can't breathe." Xueqi rolled his eyes, almost foaming at the mouth. "Ha ha ha. Thank you, Xueqi. You really are the dwarves' best friend. I can't wait for the day you lead the army to counterattack the orcs. If we're lucky, we can counterattack this year. But this depends on whether the heavens are looking out for us," Xueqi consoled. Magni automatically filtered out the rest. "All right, I'll tell them to hold on for another half a year." "What the hell I said is..." Magni blinked and showed a cunning side. "My people are in the most difficult situation. They need hope. If that doesn't work, you can send a few thousand soldiers to Iron Furnace Castle next winter. They'll still be there." "What the F***ck, this works? You're really a dwarf. Are you sure you're not a goblin in dwarf skin?" Xueqi wanted to roll his eyes this time. In return for the Alliance's support for Iron Furnace Castle, Magni and Xueqi's fleet brought a large batch of long warhammers and axes forged by the dwarves in winter. There was no choice. Dwarves just didn't like to use swords. Rather than having dwarven craftsmen forge long swords, it was better to make what they were best at. Dwarven two-handed warhammers and axes were one-handed versions for humans anyway. If they were made longer and slightly balanced, they would be the best weapons in the human world. That was a total of 30,000 dwarven weapons. All the kings were jealous of the dwarves' man-made weapons, but Magni was stubborn and didn't buy it. The food and medicine were split evenly between Xueqi, so he only gave it to Xueqi. Xueqi had the final say on how it was divided. Xueqi was also very generous. He would not take it all for himself. After wrangling with the other kings, regardless of the country's strength, the principle was that whoever contributed the most troops, money, and manpower would get the biggest share. Naturally, King Tarina's received the biggest piece of cake. Magrani and General Abendis's Blood Cross Army's elite team had all changed their equipment, and everyone else was envious of them. After the rare benefit, the military conference hall became like a market again because of the orcs' movements. We must also build a line of defense on the South Stream coast. We want your cement. A lot of it. King Xian roared. After the defense line at Hillsbrad Hills was built like an iron bucket by Duque, the most excited person was King Xian of Gilnis. In theory, if the Horde didn't attack South Shore, the closest place to land was the South Stream coast on the southwest side of the northern continent, which was in front of Gilnis. He emphasized this more than 10 times in an hour. In the harsh winter, it was impossible for the craftsmen to work when the sky was full of snow. After spring, to build a line of defense in the shortest time possible, cement was a must. Don't worry, Xian. If a horde without warships dares to go that far to Gilnis, Kurtira's fleet will bleed them dry, King Del-Lin comforted him. For the sake of the holy light, can't you be a little nervous? If those crazy green-skinned creatures can make two-headed ogres and move undead knights, why can't they make warships or flying demon legions? Xian was too excited. His thick red neck looked like 2 dicks had been inserted into it. Chapter 298. Lothar couldn't help but roll his eyes as he watched the kings turn the splendid meeting hall into a noisy market. No one could maintain their gentlemanly demeanor in the face of such a major event. Lothar had to appease Xian. Don't worry, the horde can't fly. Even if they can, it's impossible for hundreds of thousands of them to fly over and land in your capital. If that's the case, we'll all cut our throats with our swords. When Lothar said this, Duque frowned. He suddenly realized a serious problem that he had neglected for a long time. The Alliance did not have a decent air force at all. This was not a simple problem. Duque knew very well where the Griffins were. They were at the Eagle's Nest Mountain in the hinterlands. The problem was that it belonged to the Wild Hammer dwarves, who were absolutely neutral. In his previous life without the Horde, the dwarves who were harder than stones didn't even care about their compatriots, the Bronzebeard dwarves, let alone the humans. This was also the result of the Battle of the Three Hammers, between the Bronzebeard, Wild Hammer, and Ebon dwarves in the Iron Furnace Castle. Thinking of this, Duque's temples twitched painfully. There was no substantial progress in the military meeting. The biggest resolution was to strengthen the Shadowfang Castle on the east side of the South Stream coast. This fortress belonged to Master Gilnis, Erigel, and was a very good defensive core. As for the plan to strengthen the entire North and South Stream coast, it was stalled due to a lack of cement and funds. King Xian almost hated Duque for this, muttering that Duque had used up all the cement in order to strengthen the defense line in the Hillsbrad Hills. Lothar patted Duque's shoulder and said, "Don't mind him." Duque could only smile bitterly. Perhaps this was the sorrow of the week. It was not Duque himself, but the current alliance. Even though Duque had killed more than 200,000 Horde soldiers twice, the Horde was still the stronger side in terms of military strength, both in terms of quantity and quality. Perhaps the gap in quality was narrowing, but the disadvantage in quantity would take at least 2 more wars to close. Until then, the alliance would be the passive side. This was a situation that was almost paradoxical. If he wanted more forces to join the alliance, he would have to let the Horde tribes into the northern continent. If they did that, they would waste the current defensive line. If they maintained the front lines and allowed the Horde to rest and recuperate in the southern continent, the Iron Furnace Fort would fall one day. When that time came, the North and South would face off, and it would be a 100-year war. Duque had a headache. After the inconclusive military meeting, Duque returned to South Shore. Then, he found 4 long white legs hanging down from the roof of his house. It wasn't the first time Duque had seen long legs hanging down from that position, but why were there 4? Could it be that if he planted a pair of legs in winter, he would be able to harvest 2 pairs in spring? Pooh. What kind of damned setting was this? Whoosh! Storm warning. Storm warning. In 10 seconds, there will be an updraft, and a lot of clothes may be blown away. Duque pinched his nose and imitated the clumsiest mechanical voice. Illyria, on the other hand, was the most thin-skinned of them all. She did a beautiful pigeon flip and jumped down. Queen Sylvie, on the other hand, giggled and swung her white legs without a care in the world. Hee sis, don't believe him. If he really dares to do that, we'll just shoot down all his magic energy balls like apples. Duque rubbed his forehead. The competitive Queen Sylvie might really do that. Alright, I think I know why the boring Windrunner ladies are here. Xueqi withdrew his gaze. Pfft, we've been moldy here for an entire winter for the Alliance. Aurelia put her hands on her waist and said confidently. Xueqi waved his hand and immediately used Magician's hand to bring a stack of letters of complaint. Yes, yes, yes. Before the winter festival, the goat that George's family used to celebrate disappeared. Later, it was found in the Windrunner's camp. The 2 legs on her head forgot to swing. My Naga told me that a nimble thief stole a dozen of my merfolk's golden pearls. A gust of wind blew. Why is the spring wind still a little cold? 2 barrels of dwarven gold wine that King Lang used to celebrate the new year and sent by Bronzebeard King of Ironforge mysteriously disappeared. Aurelia looked at the back of a certain future queen who was turning around and trying to escape. At this moment, a gust of wind blew on Xueqi's roof, and the 2 sisters disappeared. Servanas. The angry voice of a big sister came from the wind. Xueqi scratched his head. As expected of a Windrunner. She can go wherever she wants. Of course, Xueqi didn't really want to settle the score with Servanas. He just wanted to tease her a little. Of course, after the incident with Xueqi, Aurelia, who had always been noble in front of others as a high elf, obviously couldn't tolerate her sister's behavior. A few minutes later, Aurelia brought back the pitiful Queen Sylvanas. With her ears pulled and tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, Sylvanas bowed with her head lowered was unexpectedly cute. Duke almost wanted to go over and kiss Queen Sheila. Well, Xueqi, I'll compensate for the loss on behalf of my sister. For a moment, Xueqi really wanted to ask Sylvanas to sell herself. That was Servanas they were talking about. The unbelievably powerful Sylvanas. Even if she didn't become a Dark Ranger, she was still unbelievably powerful. But that was impossible. First of all, it couldn't pass Xueqi's own heart. Secondly, the Windrunner family was actually quite rich. No, it's just a few 100,000 gold coins. I don't care. One experiment is gone. Ha ha ha. That's my good Xueqi. No wonder I loved you so much. Aurelia patted Xueqi's shoulder and spoke like an elder. But Xueqi knew that Aurelia was actually feeling guilty. Stealing tributes was definitely a big or small matter. Of course, Xueqi knew very well that in front of a great enemy, no human kingdom would fight with the Pharaoh Xueqi over such a thing. Sylvanas stuck out her tongue where Aurelia couldn't see. However, the Windrunner's perception of the outside world didn't just rely on his eyesight. The Demon King's hand that was pulling Sylvanas' ear tightened. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Sister, I was wrong. This time, Sylvanas was really terrified. I also know that you've been idle for so long. You need some excitement. We're always ready to fight for the righteous cause of the Alliance. Aurelia was serious, puffing out her chest and sucking in her stomach. Fight my ass. You're an idiot, okay? Now there's a mission that may or may not be dangerous. Me. The 2 sisters raised their hands together. Chapter 299. Magic was a magical thing. It had an extremely unscientific side, but it also had a fixed pattern that showed its supernatural side. When Xueqi combined the 3 elements of fire, frost, and arcane magic into an energy ball, Lothar looked at Xueqi as if he was looking at a walking bomb. After being repeatedly hit by Lang's King's contempt, Xueqi gave up on healing. It was March, a day of spring. It was also the 3-month anniversary of Xueqi losing his little maid. It was because Xueqi had left Vanessa in South Shore after going to Karazhan. Then Vanessa, who felt that she could not be of much help, went to train in a sacred place for thieves. Yes, it was the Ravenholt Manor in the northeast of the Hillsbrad Hills. Although the little maid left a note saying that she was training somewhere in the area, Xueqi immediately thought of that place. Logically speaking, recruiting a team of spies was also quite useful. Unfortunately, it was really useless in the following period of time. Since Xueqi was busy, he did not bother about it for the time being. In March, the Horde would make a big move. Van Cleve and Stroman, who had spent the entire autumn and winter in the western wilderness, sent a letter asking when they would take action. Xueqi's instructions were, wait for the main force of the Horde to leave the southern continent first. The main force of the Horde could not stay in the southern continent for long. If it were a human king, he might be satisfied with occupying such a vast piece of land, but unfortunately, It was the horde, and the aggressiveness of the orcs would not let them stay put. After the midwinter ended, the troops that fought in South Shore last year gathered in South Shore again. However, Lothar flew into a rage, and rushed to Rotterdam to vent his anger on King Tyrrhenas again. The reason was simple. At such a time, Rotterdam, Daligen, and Alterac actually refused to enter a state of total war. What do you mean by this? Do you really think that you can destroy millions of orcs with just these few people? Even if we ignore the laborers who do not have much combat power, and even if the elites of the Horde are decreasing, the total number of troops of the Horde is still close to 500,000. Lothar slammed the table hard. Facing Lothar's anger, Menethil too was also helpless. I've already sent out my warning. Most of my lords, however, chose to use money to fulfill their obligations. So if you want money I can, but if you want soldiers, I can't give you more. Sorry, Commander Lothar. This was the weirdness of the feudal knight system. The people were the private property of the lord, and the lord listened to the king. However, the king had no right to directly conscript the lord's people without a proper reason. The tradition left behind by the Arathor Empire was that, unless it was a formal invasion with the goal of occupying land, or if one's own territory was under attack, each lord had the right to choose to respond to the king's summons with money and resources. If Tyrrhenas used too many soldiers from his territories, it would cause a chain reaction where the ruler was weak and his subordinates were strong. Lothar was so angry that he turned to Antonidas. The Daligen's president also had a bitter expression on his face. Something has happened to the Daligen. A bunch of blind neutral mages who don't understand the general trend of the world are protesting against the Daligen's excessive involvement in the war. They think that as long as the Daligen is fine, they can stay out of it. Then, while one of our counselors is in trouble, they directly held a protest and asked for a new election and a series of reforms. Lothar was so angry that he almost pulled out his hair. Finally, he looked at King Eden of Alterac. Alterac is a small country. Conscripting one more infantry is already the limit. If we continue to conscript, we won't even need the orcs to attack. Half of our people will starve to death in winter. Yes, that's why a certain deputy commander bought food from our Barav family. At this moment, Lothar even wanted to kill Eden. Using the excuse that the country was weak and that the food had been given to the Stormwind citizens, he directly shirked his responsibility. In the end, these three families saw that Stormguard was at the Sodder Bridge on the eastern front. The Stormwind refugees were defending South Shore on the central front, and Kurtira's navy was protecting the western front. This group of short-sighted nobles and mages thought that if someone were to die, it would be the foreigners who died. It was none of their business. At this moment, the evil side of human nature was completely exposed. Lothar was almost out of his mind. His roar almost echoed throughout the entire Lordaeron palace. Tell those damned nobles and idiot mages who think they are very safe. Now, the Horde's military strength is 3 times that of the Alliance. The orcs' individual combat ability is also 3 times that of humans. Once our coastal defense is broken, then every human will pay the price in blood for your refusal to enter a state of total war. Money. 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 What's the use of money? You're talking about money when you've lost your head. Eden muttered, if the defense line is broken, then someone must have not done their best. King Del Lyn spat on the ground. Since Stormwind was besieged last year, the entire shipyard of Kurtira's has been building ships in 3 shifts 24 hours a day. I've used up every gold in the treasury to build more shipyards and train every fisherman of Kurtira's into sailors. Now, I can't wait for the orcs to take 100 goblin airships and descend into your Alterac palace, holding a human barbecue party in your palace courtyard. With that, Del Lyn kicked open the meeting hall's door and left without looking back, leaving Eden roaring in exasperation with a face as red as a pig's liver. On this day, the kings of Stormwind and the other 3 countries, who had already entered a state of total war, parted on bad terms with the leaders of the 3 countries who were only willing to enter a state of partial war. If not for the incident on the 15th of March, this might have been a precursor to the split of the alliance. On this day, the 3rd Fleet of Kurtira's patrolled the waters opposite the Paladin Gulf. The lookout suddenly saw something unusual. On the horizon, countless blood-red sails suddenly appeared. The lookout sounded the alarm. Dang dang dang. The shrill alarm alarmed the entire fleet. What the hell? Why are the blood sail pirates here? The commander of the 3rd Fleet, Major General Kent, cursed angrily. However, Something else he saw through the telescope made him shudder. Ships. More than a dozen huge warships. They were definitely battleship-class ships, but they had a completely different shape from human ships. Apart from the sails, the entire ship had no sense of beauty. It was like a pile of garbage floating on the sea, piled up by countless messy wooden products. However, the cannons on the warships clearly told the Major General that they were all F*King warships. And they were Orc warships. "Commander! Please give your orders," the first mate shouted anxiously. The other ships also sent flags of inquiry. Who has the navy of Kurtiras ever been afraid of on the sea? Raise the battle flag. Attack. A day later, the entire alliance learned of the destruction of the Third Fleet of Kurtiras. All the countries were shocked. Chapter 300. In the headquarters of South Shore. General Dolan's face was livid. He had spent the entire autumn and winter to replenish the Third Fleet, which had suffered heavy losses in the last battle. Because of this, the Fourth Fleet, which should have been completed long ago, only had 80% of the ships of the official fleet. But now, the entire Third Fleet had been destroyed in a single day. Out of over 100 warships of various sizes, only 8 had managed to escape back to South Shore. Most of the others had sunk, and about a dozen small and medium-sized warships had been captured. The only good news was that the Third Fleet had also dealt a heavy blow to the enemy. According to the report, the Bloodsail fleet had sunk about 50 ships. This result was not enough to comfort the people. It was very simple. The damned Bloodsail pirates had betrayed the humans and joined the Orcs, which had tipped the scales of victory. Humans were no longer the overlords of the sea. Goddamn Fairville. Dolan smashed a solid wooden table into pieces with a punch. Duque, Anduin, and Lang were all silent. Duque felt a little guilty. Back then, it was a certain someone who provoked the Bloodsail pirates. Duke killed him and captured him, which was how the Stormwind Kingdom's fleet came to be. Duque cursed in his heart. I should have gotten rid of them. Duque was just wishful thinking. The world of Azeroth was too big. If he wanted to deal with the Bloodsail pirates, Duque, who did not know the coordinates, had no place to teleport. Teleport to Stormwind City, which was occupied by the Orcs. That would be too much. Even if he rode a griffin, Duque had to spend more than a week crossing the entire continent to Stranglethorn Vale, which was the southernmost part of the continent. Then, he had to rely on his unreliable memory in the game to find the Bloodsail pirates' nest. Then, without any help, he had to subdue the remaining 3 fleets of the Bloodsail pirates and make them abandon their nest and head north? Just thinking about it made Duque's head hurt. But now, the Bloodsail pirates had come themselves. If it was just them, Duque would not even have a breather. The problem was that they were mixed up with the tribe. That would be troublesome. Noxus asked, how many fleets do the Bloodsail pirates have? 3, but their combined strength is roughly equal to 2 of Kultira's fleets, Duque muttered. No, I know Fairville. That guy never puts all the stakes on anything. Therefore, he would only bring 2 fleets at most. The problem is the tribe's new battleship. Dai Lin recovered from his anger. Turayan murmured, even if our navy can still suppress the Horde's fleet, but... Lothar's face was pale. But we won't be able to stop the transport ships. That was the main point. The Horde did not need to have complete control over the sea. All they needed to do was cross the damn sea and they would be able to display their unparalleled land superiority. Lang asked, will the tribe attack South Shore again? This was not nervousness. On the contrary, it was a kind of hope. Now that Duque was running South Shore like an iron bucket, he couldn't wait for the tribe to be so stupid as to kill themselves. Duque shook his head. I dare say, unless the tribe replaces the dead Blackhand as their chief. If it was Orgrim, he wouldn't do something so brainless. But we can still think of a way to force the Horde to attack South Shore again. Duque changed the topic. Really? The Alliance's leaders were overjoyed. I have to remind everyone that this is not a good thing, Duque said in a low voice. Why? Lang asked. I plan to hang Blackhand's head and the flag of the previous chief at the port of South Shore. This will make the Horde attack South Shore again, but it will also make the last group of orcs who openly oppose the new chief, Orgrim, die. After a moment of silence, Noxus said, let's do that. I've thought about it. This will increase the Horde's combat power in a short period of time, but it will also weaken the Horde's fighting potential. Everyone came to a realization. The orcs who were unhappy with Orgrim might change their minds in the future, but if they died now, there would be no future for them. In the past winter, the orcs must have gone out with their wives and children. Before the new generation of orcs grew up, there would be one less orc dead. Then it's decided. We will force the Horde to attack South Shore. At the same time, we will see if we can fight the Horde at sea and regain control of the sea. That afternoon, Black Hand's huge frozen head was placed on the lighthouse at South Shore's port. At the same time, a battle flag of the previous chief was placed there. Kurtiraz's fleet deliberately sent out the Horde's scouting boats to watch, and even ignored the scouting boats that came to check. Yes, I want you orcs to know. Duke's ruthless move caused a lot of trouble for Orgrim on the orc side. This is blasphemy. Blasphemy against the warriors of the Horde. Blasphemy against the glory of the Horde. Attack South Shore and kill all the humans. Turn their chief's head into a pot of urine. A great number of chieftains of small and medium clans were clamoring in Orgrim. Their clamoring annoyed Orgrim to no end. This was the result of Orgrim's lack of prestige. Do you want the warriors of the Horde to break through the strongest defense line of the humans? Let the warriors of the Horde die for nothing? Orgrim cursed. The orcs are invincible. The weak defense line of the humans can't stop our battle axes. This was already a spiritual victory. Great Chief. As long as we can stop the human warships, the warriors of the Horde are invincible. This guy wasn't that stupid after all. Great Chief. Would you rather trust those dead humans and traitors who betrayed your own people than trust the warriors of your tribe? A chief brought up the Death Knights and the traitors of the Blood Sail pirates, causing Orgrim's eyelids to twitch. In that instant, Orgrim had the urge to smash that guy's head with his hammer. Of course, the defeat at South Shore was partly a test, but wasn't it because the former great chief, Black Hand, was too prodigal? If he had enough elite soldiers, Orgrim wouldn't have accepted the Death Knights. Orgrim was extremely annoyed. All right. All chiefs who are willing to attack South Shore, please step forward. The orcs' new fleet will open the way for you. In an instant, dozens of chiefs from small and medium clans stepped forward. Their numbers were so many that Orgrim almost went crazy. At this moment, the chief of the Dragonmaw clan, Zulu Hid, gave Orgrim a look. When Orgrim turned to look at Grom Hellhowl, Master Howl gave him a nod of approval. All right. As you wish. Here's our plan this time. Chapter 301. The 26th of March, Year 2 of the Dark Portal. A large-scale sea-crossing battle that did not exist in history had begun. It was different from the previous probing attack. This time, the Horde had turned out in full force. The Alliance's scouts had risked their lives to report that the orcs had filled all the beaches in the wetlands where ships could be boarded. It was estimated that the Horde would send 500,000 troops this time. The orcs would either send this batch of troops to the northern continent or feed them to the fishes in the sea. They knew that more than a third of the 500,000 orcs were laborers, and there were many new recruits who had arrived through the Dark Portal. Compared to the previous 500,000 orcs, their combat power had decreased by at least 30%. That number was still quite frightening. Have those beast men gone mad? Every noble and neutral Dalaran mages who had heard of this news were shocked. It was only then that Rotterdam, Dalajan, and Alterac quickly passed a resolution for an all-out war, and the entire kingdom began to mobilize. I hope we can make it through this time, Noxus muttered. On the flagship of the First Fleet of Kuel Salas, Admiral Daylin was staring at the sea map. Looking at the 3 blood-red model ships that represented the 3 fleets, Daylin was distraught. Apart from the time when the Third Fleet got too close, Daylin had never taken the Orc Navy seriously. This time, the enemy was not the silly Orc transport ships that were almost like targets. Not only was there an Orc battleship of unknown strength, but there was also his old rival, the former Duke of Kul Tiras, Fairville. Fairville had once challenged him for the throne, so Daylin did not dare to underestimate him. Even though the quality of the new batch of Blood Sail battleships was not as good as the original Kul Tiras battleships, the quantity was there. After Fairville's training, the standard of the pirates would not be too bad. Even if it was not the highest level of threat, Kul Tira's battleship would at least have to deal with it. At this moment, a visitor shocked Daylin. When he finished speaking, Daylin could not believe his ears. Is what you said true? The visitor nodded and left. It was late at night. On the other side of the wetlands, the Paladin Bay was shrouded in darkness. Dark clouds covered the sky, completely blocking every ray of moonlight that attempted to shine onto the sea. Every ship of the Bloodsail fleet was moving up and down rhythmically on the waves. For pirates who made a living on the sea, this was the norm. A large number of pirates pulled out their hammocks in the narrow cabin and slept soundly. The stern of every large ship was, by default, the captain's lounge. Miss Jessie Ferryville was the only heir to Duke Ferryville after her brother was blasted into the sky by the Blackwater pirates. She was already 16 years old, but because she had a little dwarf blood in her, she looked short and strong. Looking at her muscular back, anyone would think that she was a man. Miss Jessie has been very upset lately. She felt that her father had gone mad. He actually sided with the orcs who killed for fun and conquered all the intelligent races in the Azeroth. What was more unacceptable was that the entire Bloodsail pirates seemed to have been kidnapped. Every ship had 2 orcs the size of a small hill watching every captain. They did not understand the human language, but according to the chief of the tribe, if they discovered that the Bloodsail pirates were trying to betray them, they would have to pay the price in blood. Pirates were never clean people. Not bathing for a few months was not a big deal in their long voyages. But the 2 smelly female orcs blocking the door of his room refreshed the lower limit of Jessie's senses. The destructive stench that she had not bathed for many years made it impossible for Jessie to sleep through the door. Jessie could only think of other things to distract herself. I'm going out to sea tomorrow to settle things with Kultiras. Damn it, this is not a duel that father or I want. At this moment, a dagger was silently pressed against her throat. Early morning on the 27th of March. Oh! The huge horns that stretched from the top of the orc archer tower to the ground let out a long and deep sound, followed by the sound of drums that shook the sky. Every orc on the coast and every pirate on the sea knew that the day of the final battle had come. Thump, thump, thump. Looking from the ship, it felt as though the whole world was shaking. This was not an illusion. Even at sea, with the ship swaying with the waves, the Bloodsail pirates could clearly see that the branches on the coast were trembling slightly, the sand on the beach was rising and falling, and the puddles of water in the wetlands seemed to form a layer of waves, shaking violently. The Duke of Fairville stood a short distance from the rudder, gripping the railings of the ship tightly. Earthquake! Even on the sea, Duke Fairville could clearly feel the rumbling of the earth coming from the sea. His first mate shook his head firmly. If this was an illusion, then it was an illusion that the entire Bloodsail pirates had tens of thousands of people on board. Ha ha ha! That is our invincible horde army. Standing beside Duke Fairville, an orc with a giant axe who seemed to be more intelligent spoke in the common language with an extremely strange accent. The entire Bloodsail fleet was in an uproar. All the Bloodsail pirates stopped what they were doing and stared in horror at the bright, dazzling green that appeared on the east coast. A moment ago, the endless swamp stretched from the coast to the limits of their vision. In the distance, some unknown substance floated in the shallow swamp, emitting an unpleasant smell into the air. Countless lake-like mud pits had split the green land into a mess, and there was no straight path at all. Now, hundreds of thousands of orcs had appeared. They ran wildly, roared, and pushed each other as they swarmed towards the sea from the horizon. They seemed to be driven by the dawn, moving desperately towards the darkness that was about to be driven away. All of the orcs had 2 legs, 2 arms and green skin, but that was the extent of their similarities. Some of the orcs were as large as burly humans, while others had stepped into the category of giants. There were also a few orcs with 2 heads and bloated bodies that were completely at the level of giants. Without exception, all of them ran wildly towards the shore. Chapter 302. The orcs and ogres were very different, but in that green tide, they all felt the same. The Bloodsail pirates could only see the green tide crossing every swamp with water, stepping on every inch of turf, and smashing everything in its way. Perhaps there were colorful snakes escaping from the swamps under the feet of the orcs, but they were all crushed. Pits, hills, swamps. Everywhere the eye could see, the green orcs surged out like a tide. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, more ships appeared on land. In order to prevent the transport ships they had built from being destroyed by the humans who had the upper hand in the sea, the orcs used a more simple and crude method to protect their ships. These transport ships, which were dozens of tons each, were all placed on the shore and piled up in places where the cannons could not reach. When the orcs were about to launch an attack, The orc laborers would drag the bottom of the ships into the water. The heavy, clumsy, but clearly moving transport ships formed a huge wave that slowly moved towards the sea. Watching the fleet sailing on land moving towards them, the blood-sail pirates remained silent and observed everything in front of them in awe. Duke Fairville had lived his entire life at sea, but he had never seen anything like this before. Countless orcs were covering the entire area. They used their strong bodies, arms with explosive muscles, big mouths full of fangs, blood-red eyes, and green skin to weave a world-class blanket, covering every corner of the sun. Fairville was filled with regret. He knew that if he had transported this terrifying fleet across the northern continent, the destruction of the humans would have entered the countdown. But beside him, an orc sword saint did not give him any face as he wiped his sword. This was a powerful warrior who killed without batting an eyelid. More than a dozen of his best sailors had tried to kill him, but none of them could get within 2 meters of him. Seeing the transport ships being thrown into the water, Fairville glanced at his daughter Jessie's flagship, which was 50 meters away. Jessie gave him a sign that only he could understand. All fleets, weigh anchor. Set sail. The target is the damned fleet of courtiers. Duke Fairville shouted. More than 10 minutes later, in response to the flash of dawn, the entire blood-sail fleet pierced straight into the sea like a curved arc. They were about to sail northward from the Gulf of Baladine, cross the sea that separated the 2 continents, and strike upon the fleet of Cour-Tyrith, who must be waiting on the surface. The damp scent of early spring was mixed with the wind and brushed past Orgrim's nose. The undulating waves of the orcs were perfectly connected with the rolling waves of the vast sea. Orgrim was riding a giant white wolf on top of a hill by the sea. From afar, it looked like he was standing on top of the waves. Looking at the shining horizon at the end of his vision, Orgrim couldn't help but feel proud. He pointed his hammer of destruction into the distance and said, "As long as I can cross this ocean, I'll be able to do it. The warriors of the Horde can destroy any resistance from any living creature in any world. We will." The famous Grom Hellscream carried his equally fearsome Bloodhowl axe and came to Orgrim's side. "Even though I've always thought that races other than the orcs are unreliable, and I don't like your attitude towards other races, I like your ability to solve problems." Orgrim didn't seem to care about Grom's complaints. He lightly bumped his huge hammer against Bloodhowl's axe. The 2 famous weapons of mass destruction let out a dull sound of heavy weapons colliding. The strongest human kingdom is Lordaeron. See you at Lordaeron. Orgrim bared his teeth. See you at Lordaeron. Grom didn't look back as he walked down the hill, leaving a trail of deep footprints and a bright silhouette. The orc transport fleet was still sending people in. The blood-sail fleet and the main orc fleet had already encountered the enemy at around 10 in the morning. An ultralight, fast, elven-styled scout ship appeared on the horizon. Then, just as the blood-sail fleet sounded the alarm, a sail appeared on the horizon. Duke Fairville furrowed his brows. It was too early. The entire fleet hadn't even left the Paladin Bay before they encountered the full force of Cour-Tyrith. It seemed that the Alliance's navy had made up their minds to wipe out the blood-sail and orc fleets here and regain control of the sea. What's going on? Duke Fairville couldn't help but look at his daughter's flagship half a nautical mile to his right. "But since we've met, let's fight. Pass the order. Turn right 40 degrees. We need to gain the upper hand." The Duke's order was met with ruthless opposition. An orc who knew the common language slammed his axe against the guardrail. "Don't be so complicated. Just attack." "Damn it! Gaining the upper hand is common sense. The Great Horde doesn't need your so-called common sense. We just need you to get close enough to the enemy's ships. The warriors of the Fireblade clan will solve all problems," the orc said in a low, muffled voice. It wasn't that Duke Fairville hadn't heard of a certain orc chief, who single-handedly destroyed a few of Cour-Tyrith's ships. He just didn't think that the orcs would use such a simple and violent method to solve all problems. This went against all common sense in naval warfare. No, it wasn't just common sense. Fairville could clearly feel the orcs' distrust. That evil great tribal chief was eager for his blood-sail fleet to perish together with the human fleet, so that the beastmen's transport ships could safely pass through every sea in the world. TCH. But the situation was beyond his control. The Duke finally waved his hand. 10 seconds later, a blood-red coat of arms unfurled on his flagship. This idiotic order was immediately sent by the command ships to confirm the flag number again and again. Gritting his teeth, he confirmed. Just like that, the entire blood sail and orc fleet split into two columns and charged forward like idiots. The more rational Alliance fleet was like a crab baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. The fleet spread out like a pincer, surrounding the enemy in half an hour. At 10:45 in the morning, the famous Battle of the Paladin Bay began. Chapter 303. Later generations' evaluation of the Battle of Paladin Bay was one-sided. Of course, this was not a traditional naval battle either. The collision of the two ideologies made this naval battle a little strange. Traditional human navies pursued the doctrine of large ships and cannons. The orc navies, on the other hand, played a typical battle with white soldiers. In a sense, the orcs were also very good at this. This was not the canon before Xueqi's transmigration, which could fire tens of kilometers. Even the World War II gunships couldn't fire at a distance of 20,000 meters. The clumsy, unrifled breech-loading cannons had a range of less than a kilometer. This was not a problem for the orc sword saints who could walk on the waves. Hellscream dismantled a Gundam with its bare hands. Oh, it was Bloodhowl dismantling a warship. This was a good lesson for the orcs. The orc warships were not weak at all against the wind. The cannons on the orc warships were basically decorations. After all, it was just a large transport ship that could move. As soon as they entered 2 nautical miles, many sampans were released from the huge garbage ships. The peons pushed these modified small turtle-shell ships and headed straight for the warships of cult Tiras. Human cannons were very useful against ships, but they should have been at a loss against these small ships. Not to mention, there were more than a dozen orc sword saints who came on the waves. Admiral Dai Lin saw that the orcs' tactics were as expected and let out a long sigh of relief. In the sea, tens of meters deep, a blue and white magic light suddenly lit up. This light was so dense that no orc could detect it except for the orc sword saints. The next moment, ice rain rose from the bottom of the sea towards the sky. Bright, beautiful, it had nothing to do with nature, it was accompanied by death. The Murloc Sage's frost arrow had terrible destructive power, but it wasn't a problem for it to pierce through the bottom of a small boat. The Murloc's unique talent could make the seawater open up a path for the frost arrow, allowing it to accurately pierce through the weak bottom of the boat. Ha ha ha. Good kill. Looking at the small boats that were paddling and trying to get close stop one after another, and the hulls entered the water, Admiral Dai Lin laughed heartily. It was not that the orc sword saints did not think of taking care of these hindering Murlocs. Firstly, underwater combat was not their forte, and secondly, there were some stronger people to deal with them. Murloc Prophet Maugr, Furious Scale Nagavara, Spiny Nagasophilis, and a large number of Naga Siren priests were all here. Ha-ha-ho-a-la-la. Chanting an incantation of unknown meaning, Maugr suddenly unleashed a powerful attack. In the sea, the Murlocs and Naga had natural magic bonuses. Not to mention that this was a battlefield that had been set up long ago. At the bottom of the water, inconspicuous conches, clamshells dozens of meters deep, and the most inconspicuous dead corals suddenly emitted the unique brilliance of magic. 2 dots formed a line, and many lines formed a pattern. At that time, the Beastman Sword Saint suddenly discovered that there was a huge magic array over 100 square meters in diameter at the bottom of the sea. Wa-la-la-la. The only 3 fingers on each of Maugr's hands trembled convulsively. His eyes turned white, and a crazed look appeared on his face. The next moment, the sea sank. In an instant, the sea level within a radius of 300 meters suddenly sank by more than 30 meters. A huge whirlpool rapidly formed. On the side, the magic stirred up 100-meter wave easily swept everything in the whirlpool into the bottom of the sea. The sword saints of the Fireblade clan were powerful, but they did not fight underwater. The bottom of the sea was the world of sea creatures. In the magic array, countless jellyfish-like tentacles rose up, pulling the sword saints deeper into the sea. The sword saints held their breath and worked hard to cut the jellyfish tentacles in the water with considerable resistance. However, when they cut 1, 3, 5, 10 more would follow. Not to mention that they were a living person, even a big ship might not be able to resist such a strange tactic. Loktar Ogre. If they did not win, they would rather die. None of the orcs showed fear on their faces. Only more orc speedboats attempted to bypass the whirlpool by paddling quickly to kill Kul Tira's fleet. On the flagship, Dai Lin held a scimitar in his right hand and a short-barreled musket in his left, watching the scene quietly. A calm smile appeared on his face. Well, my old friend, now it's time for you to make a choice. But before that, whoa! A green phantom approached at high speed. He was so fast that just the splash of water under his feet created a long white line on the surface of the sea. Not a single long-range weapon could hit this elusive figure. Just like that, he crossed the distance of 7 or 8 meters between the sea and the side of the ship like a bolt of lightning and suddenly reached the deck. Naturally, the small fries could not catch him. However, what greeted him was a war hammer with a holy golden glow. Clang! With a deafening clang, the orc sword saint and the newcomer clashed without any fancy moves. I am Paladin Tyrion Fordring. Tell me your name, orc. Before Xueqi's transmigration, Tyrion had been called the Empress Dowager by countless players. This was the most powerful moment of his life. The sea breeze ruffled his hair and beard, making this young knight look even more extraordinary. Galeo! The orc sword saint only spat out this name before he immediately charged forward and fought the Empress Dowager. This was not all the orcs had. To catch bandits, one had to catch their leader first. Orcs knew this trick as well. A cold glint of a sword appeared behind Daelin. No one on the ship knew where it came from, except Daelin himself. Clang! With an unconventional scimitar, the shining edge of the scimitar perfectly blocked the sharp blade that was supposed to pierce through Daelin's chest. Bang bang! 2 gunshots rang out almost at the same time. The ambusher was a complete idiot. Not only did he fail, he was also hit by a musket. This wasn't an ordinary single-barreled gun. It was meant for a king, so how could it be low level? Even though the gun was fired with a trigger, the barrel of the gun glowed with the brilliance of a magic circle. The complicated and mysterious blue runes only appeared on the barrel the moment the gun was fired. Moreover, it was a single-barreled gun, but it could fire 2 consecutive shots under the effect of magic. Whoever was hit by it would die. Wow! An orc sword saint with a red flag on his back, a string of huge white beads around his neck, and a single-edged broadsword in his hand groaned as he took 3 steps back and revealed himself. Despicable! He spoke in standard common language. Daelin's handsome face, which had been baptized by the sea breeze, smiled proudly. Hey! I don't want to be called despicable by an orc who only knows how to sneak up on me. We're at most on the same level. Don't you think so? Samuro. That's right. It was the orc sword saint, Samuro. Humph. With a snort, Samuro swung his blade and pounced forward. Chapter 304. The difference in strength between the 7 human kings was huge. The ones who could fight were humanoid nuclear bombs like Antonida's, while the ones who couldn't, such as Tarina's or Eden, would be blown away by the wind. Overall, Thoradin the Great's martial spirit had been passed down. Lang and Salas Trollbane's strength was above average. King Xion's strength was also off the charts after learning to transform, only slightly weaker than Queen Sylvia. Of course, King Daelin was also quite fierce, stepping into the realm of heroes. If it wasn't for the infuriating incident where he betrayed his father, Daelin wouldn't have been killed by Rexer and the other Horde heroes. Now, in a one-on-one battle, Daelin, who was still in his prime, was fighting Samuro. The Horde sent out strong fighters to attack, and the warships of both sides were still closing in on each other. About 1,000 meters away, on Duke Fairville's ship, the beastman in charge of monitoring the Duke gasped when he saw the arc of light from his hero's slash. Ha! I didn't expect the humans to have strong fighters. The beastmen worshipped the strong. To them, a strong fighter could earn their respect beyond their race. 1,000 meters away, a person was just a small dot. But this didn't stop him from knowing that Samuro hadn't taken down the enemy's leader. The humans have more strong fighters than you think, Duke Fairville said coldly. But that doesn't include you, the beastman said harshly. Humph! The Duke snorted, and the beastman's sword saint behind him took a step forward, clearly threatening him. Now, you can play your favorite cannon battle. The beastman's arrogant order almost angered Fairville half to death. You're not even giving me the upper hand. Now that your brainless assault team is no longer effective, you want to let my ship take the lead? The frustration and helplessness almost drove Fairville crazy. What else could Fairville do? Right now, he and his fleet were like meat on the chopping board. He had to raise his hand and signal that he was ready to fire. Target? The beastman's trash battleships, a cold voice interrupted the Duke's words. Without giving anyone time to react, an ice-cold aura instantly exploded on the ship. A bone-chilling cold swept past everyone's face like lightning, but the only ones who were frozen were the beast men in charge of guarding and the sword saint. In less than 1/100th of a second, all the beast men near Duke Fairville had turned into ice sculptures. Every single orc's ferocious expression, their tensed muscles, their half-drawn blades. All the details could be seen clearly. Unfortunately, they were just ice sculptures that had lost their lives. A figure in blue and white robes suddenly appeared less than 3 meters in front of Duke Fairville. "Sir Duke Marcus, I didn't expect you, the Alliance's vice-commander, to personally take action," the Duke muttered to himself. Duque confidently appeared and raised his hand, casting an icicle spell that was mixed with the characteristics of a tornado, easily sending those beast men flying over the side of the ship. Just before the ice cubes fell into the sea, a continuous "Kacha" sound stimulated the eardrums of every blood sail pirate. Right before their eyes, the beastman watchers who had been threatening them for more than a month turned into beautiful ice crystals that dissipated with the wind. With great power comes great responsibility. Even the Commander Lothar can charge at the front, so why can't I, the Vice-Commander, do the same? Amidst the laughter, the watchers turned into ashes. The one who killed the watchers on Jesse Fairville's ship was Vanessa Van Cleef. The incompetent little maid who had just returned from a short period of training at Ravenholt Manor had sliced the beast man into 18 pieces with lightning-quick strikes. It wasn't just her. The assassins from MI7 in Stormwind had struck at lightning speed, killing every beastman on every bloodsail pirate ship. One after another, the bloodsail pirate ships raised the flag of the Alliance. At this point, even the slowest of the horde knew that the bloodsail pirates had rebelled. "I told you that humans are unreliable," the beastman captain on the horde's warship roared angrily. He had the unskilled beastmen change the direction of the huge sails in an attempt to catch up to the bloodsail pirate warships while the wind was against them. The bloodsail pirate fleet was undoubtedly at a disadvantage against the Alliance's naval fleet. However, the bloodsail pirate fleet had the upper hand against the horde's huge warships. The bloodsail pirate fleet's sudden change of tack brought great trouble to the horde's warships. The original numerical advantage had instantly turned into a huge disparity in strength. Bang! 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 The bloodsail pirate fleet opened fire. The huge shrapnel shot toward the masts of the horde's warships hundreds of meters away. The well-trained and experienced bloodsail cannoneers easily destroyed most of the masts and sails of the horde's warships in 2 or 3 rounds of bombardment. The bloodsail pirate fleet tried their best to steer their ships in an S-shape on the sea while trying to distance themselves from the horde's warships to avoid being hit by the Alliance's cannons. After losing their masts and even their oars were cut off by Duque's Naga's trident, the horde's huge warships were like a pile of garbage floating on the sea, helplessly and hopelessly enduring the Alliance's attacks. At this time, the bloodsail pirate fleet was the first to cease fire. Why cease fire? Duque frowned slightly. If you knew the structure of the horde's warships, you would know that cannons are useless against them, Duke Fairville explained. It's all because of those damned goblins. Fairville's eyes flashed with hatred at the mention of those short and greedy green-skinned creatures. The horde's warships are the masterpiece of those goblins in Booty Bay. Last night, it was Vanessa and Duque who snuck into Jesse's captain's room and learned that the bloodsail pirate fleet had been forced to join the horde's camp. In the past winter, Orgrim sent the horde's army south to Stranglethorn Vale, where the climate was warmer. The despicable goblins did not surrender in the face of the horde's army. Instead, they made the horde let go of Booty Bay in a way that Orgrim was very satisfied with. The first thing they did was to sell out their enemy, the bloodsail pirate fleet. The horde lacked a fleet, so the evil goblins suggested Orgrim to swallow up the bloodsail pirate fleet. It was the middle of winter at that time, and almost all the bloodsail pirate fleet were on land in the bloodsail fortress. In the end, they were all wiped out by the invincible orcs. Of course, how could an ambitious and ruthless person like Orgrim allow the goblins to be his spear? That was why they had this super warship that Duque called a large piece of garbage. Other than the hull of the ship that was covered with iron sheets and was symbolically equipped with 10 cannons, the rest of the space was a crazy warship that was covered with protective baffles. Chapter 305. From the start, Duque knew that Orgrim's focus was not on the naval battle itself. Win or lose, as long as more than 60% of the transport ships reached the landing site, it would be a victory for the beast men. More than 80% would be a crushing victory. Looking at the horizon, Duque could clearly see the horde's transport ships filling up the entire sea. There were so many of them that it was enough to make one's scalp go numb. Completely ignoring the naval battle, the transport ships headed north at high speed. Every beastman laborer in the ships rowed with all their might, as if they wanted to vent all their energy on the sea. After receiving a warning from the system genie, Xueqi set his sights on one of the beastman warships. He quickly issued a few orders. Vara, have your men use drills to take care of the beastman warships. I want these rubbish piles to sink into the sea and turn into coral reefs. Magar, after you've dealt with the sacred swordsman, attack the transport ships. Xueqi turned to Fairville. Don't worry about Dylan, and don't worry about your position in the alliance. As I promised, as long as you fight this battle well, you and your fleet will be under Stormwind's command. A so-called duke who had left his own kingdom and was only left with a noble position in name, and had become a pirate. Of course he could not be compared to Duke, who was the most popular person in the alliance. Fervier bowed deeply, but no one noticed that Fervier's face was twitching in pain. Kurtira's 2nd and 4th fleets, the original Stormwind Kingdom's fleet, and the Bloodsail fleet sailed northeast at high speed. They wanted to send as many beastmen as possible to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes while the beastmen were defenseless. Xueqi jumped out of the ship, and the surging seawater froze beneath his feet. This time, there was no need to save 50,000 Stormwind soldiers, and Xueqi did not waste any mana. He only kept the ice within a radius of 50 meters. As the waves surged, Xueqi bobbed up and down on the ice. Of course, Xueqi was indeed close to a huge beastman warship. At this moment, a few huge figures appeared. Xueqi narrowed his eyes. 2 demonic guards wielding large weapons and 2 even larger apocalypse guards. These 4 demons lined up and surrounded the beastman warlock in the middle as they floated above the sea. Hee. Greetings, human mage. I am Lokama Sharktooth, warlock of the Storm Marauder clan. The old and hunchbacked orc politely placed his left hand on his chest and saluted Xueqi. Xueqi frowned. Sure enough, he had messed up the course of the world. Lokama Sharktooth was indeed a famous rancor. Before Gul'dan fell into a coma because of Medivh, he was the unofficial leader of the Shadow Council, second only to Gul'dan. The problem was that in normal history, this old warlock was slaughtered by Gul'dan and used as a test subject to create a Death Knight. Why was he still alive? Furthermore, he was so strong. As if he was disgusted by the surging waves, a terrifying black aura spread out from his body, and the huge waves were completely separated in a radius of 200 meters around him and Duke. It was the sea, but the surface was as calm as a lake. Countless fish and prawns that could not escape in time lost their lives under the dark power and floated to the surface. More than 10 teleportation doors opened around Lokama. More demons came out. More than 100 imps, dozens of burly voidwalkers, 20 coquettish succubi, and 10 demon hounds. Of course, the most powerful ones were the demonic guards. There were already more than 200 of them and they were still increasing. This was practically a small demon army. Could a demon warlock who specialized in demon element be this powerful? Or should I say, as expected of the former number 2 powerhouse of the Shadow Council? The ice under his feet continued to extend forward. Xueqi continued to walk forward and answered in a loud voice. Duke Marcus. Reputation was such a thing. No matter how honorable you were, if the other party did not know about you, they would not care about you. Once you were famous, whether it was for fame or notoriety, your name would be your calling card. Once you announced your name, all the notes would appear in the other party's mind. Not many beast men would know the names of the kings of the 7 kingdoms of the human alliance, even if there were countless beast men wreaking havoc in the ruins of Stormwind City. Perhaps many beast men remembered Lothar, who had killed the previous great chief, but there was only one human that the entire tribe was familiar with. He was the destroyer of over 200,000 beast men, the Inferno Apostle in the eyes of the beast men, the most sinister and cunning great demon king, Duke Marcus. A gurgling sound came from Lokama's throat, followed by a strange demonic cry that was neither human nor beast. Wah! A large amount of dark aura shot out from the gaps between the bone spurs and the muscles on his back. Then, Lokama took out a bloody necklace from his space storage and put it around his neck. Xueqi's pupils suddenly shrank, and the muscles on his face twitched uncontrollably in anger. It was very simple. Every bead on the necklace was a shrunken human head, the head of the Storm Royal Mage Legion. He didn't have any deep relationships with them. Most of them were just nodding acquaintances to Duke, But every single one of them once had the same status as Duke. Using their heads to make a forbidden magic tool was undoubtedly a blasphemy to the entire Stormwind city, and even the entire alliance. Slap. Slap. Even though he was not attacked, Xueqi felt as if he had been slapped multiple times. His entire face was burning and stinging. He. Angry? Dissatisfied? No problem, you will soon become one of them. Ever since we fought with you human mages, it has been a lucky day for us warlocks. As long as we concentrate whatever magic circuit you have in your head and customize it, we can increase our spellcasting ability exponentially. Ha 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 ha. Lochamard laughed wildly and waved his hand. 10 of the largest teleportation portals appeared. 10 terrifying yellow-skinned demons with huge demonic wings stepped through the teleportation portals. The moment they appeared, they cast Water Float and stared at Xueqi viciously. Xueqi suddenly raised his head. I have never liked to torture the souls of my defeated opponents, but for you, I have decided to make an exception. Chapter 306. Another Warlock, a true Beastman powerhouse. In the system notification, the glaring red mark told Xueqi how dangerous his opponent was. The only good thing was that there was no skull mark on the power comparison panel. This was the era of heroes. Not many of the famous powerhouses were unworthy of their name. Since he knew that his opponent was once the second-in-command of the Shadow Council, Xueqi had no reason to hold back. Perhaps the two-headed ogre magician Gujar who came from the Dark Portal a few months ago was Gul'dan's new favorite. But that was just another name on the list of targets that Xueqi had to defeat. Inhaling a mouthful of water vapor, Xueqi immediately saw a dense rain of fireballs whizzing toward him from the group of imps. Xueqi reached out and drew a line from his left and right, and a translucent wall of water immediately appeared in front of the ice block beneath his feet. It was at least 5 meters tall and 20 meters wide. Xueqi pushed forward, and the thick wall of water immediately surged forward like a real tide, producing a rumbling sound. As a low-level demon, the fireballs of the imps were not very powerful. Like a cigarette but falling into the water, they were extinguished the moment they hit the wall of water. Humph! Lockhama snorted coldly. He actually ignored the situation on the surface of the sea and waved his hand, sending a rain of fire toward Xueqi's face. Sizzle! The rain of fire fell on the surface of the sea, forming a wall of fire that was larger and thicker than Xueqi's wall of water. It pushed back in Xueqi's direction. There was a series of kacha, kacha. Continuous sounds of ice shattering could be heard. The frozen sea in front of Xueqi was completely shattered. The huge force caused the shattered ice to roll back toward Xueqi. It was as if there was a hailstorm in front of Xueqi. However, the ice cubes did not fall. They were decomposed by the high temperature in midair. They first turned into snow powder, then instantly sublimated into water vapor, and finally turned into nothingness. Xueqi knew that Lockhama had found out the difference in strength between the two sides. That's right, in terms of the quality of his magic, Lockhama should be at the peak of the Morning Star realm. With the addition of the necklace made from the heads of more than 10 human wizards, Lockhama's strength had risen sharply. In terms of the total amount of magic, he should be at the level of a first-rank Radiant Moon Wizard. Xueqi sneered. I won't lose in terms of total magic power. The next moment, Lockhama's demon hounds charged. When warlocks fought against mages, they basically relied on these evil dogs. The Devil Hound was a piece of cake for physical-type professions. This kind of dog-shaped demon that was entirely red, had 2 horns, and 2 strange tentacles. There was nothing outstanding about it in terms of attack, defense, speed, and so on. In fact, it was even below the average standard of most demons. The most disgusting thing about the Devil Hounds was that they were anti-magic. It was not appropriate to say that magic was forbidden. To be more precise, the Demon Hounds could emit an elemental light wave to disrupt the spellcasting of mages. Not only did it prevent low-level mages from absorbing the elements of the elemental realm, but it could also take advantage of the mage's spellcasting to send chaotic energy currents into the mage's magic circuit. To put it bluntly, it was a sh*T stirring stick. Disgusting, but effective. Every Devil Hound stared at Xueqi, trying to attack when Xueqi was chanting and give Xueqi a greater blow. However, they were disappointed. In other words, Xueqi's attack was beyond the imagination of these low-intelligence dog-shaped demons. Xueqi did not use any magic himself. It was all done by the system elf. Without any warning, 108 magic hands appeared neatly behind Xueqi. The magic hands glowed with a faint blue arcane light. Dazzling light flashed between the fingers, and the devil hounds that were dozens of meters away from the magic hands were pierced by huge ice spikes that protruded from the surface of the sea. After the ice spikes that were as thick as the mouth of a bowl pierced through their hearts, more ice spikes pierced the devil hounds. Ha! Lakima's face darkened. The magic resistance of the demon hounds was quite high. In contrast, their physical resistance was terrible. Turning ice magic into a physical form to attack the devil hounds showed that Xueqi had rich experience in fighting against demon warlocks. Despite Xueqi's title of Beastman Butcher, Xueqi rarely fought in magic battles. Apart from the 100-armed Reaper, whose strength was unknown, this was the first time Xueqi fought against a warlock on an official occasion. Lakima instinctively thought of Xueqi as a weakling from the academy. Arctic Extension! Xueqi shouted. This time, he finally made a move himself. Without the hindering devil hounds, he did not have to worry about being interrupted. Even with the help of the system, Xueqi was very confident that he could quickly adjust the chaos of the magic circuit. However, he did not want to be silenced if he could. Warlocks could grind down energy consumption. Demon warlocks were the most shameless of all warlocks. What was supposed to be a one-on-one fight turned into a group fight. It would be great if he could play as a mower, but he was afraid of other things. Just as Xueqi turned the second wave of succubi and devil guards into ice sculptures, Lakima, who was on the other side, quickly used hand gestures and evil incantations to cast curses and magic. Most shaman orc warlocks seem to like to attach curses and other curse rings to certain totem poles. When necessary, they could draw them back from the totem poles. Thus, their casting speed was extremely fast. Almost at the same time, Xueqi also felt the changes in his body. Pain, convulsions, fatigue, heat, weakness. Looking at the series of negative statuses that appeared on his retina, Xueqi felt like he was about to burst into tears. You are affected by the curse of pain. You are affected by the curse of fatigue. There were more than 10 curses of various sizes and 7 to 8 negative statuses. Even if there were 100 orcs, their life force would be drained in an instant, let alone a human like Xueqi. Without hesitation, Xueqi immediately activated the ice barrier. A cold sensation instantly spread throughout his body. Apart from the ice element, all other elements and powers were instantly expelled from his body. Teste. Lakima snorted coldly. He was originally planning to wait for the invincibility of the ice barrier to end before giving Xueqi all the curses and debuffs. Who knew that a storm that he had never seen before would engulf his demon army? White frost, red flames, and purple arcane magic. 3 different elements were perfectly blended together and shot towards his demon army. Frost Fire Arrow. It was not that Lakima had never seen this spell before. It was a damaging spell that absorbed the essence of 3 different types of magic at the same time. It was very effective against any type of enemy. If it could be used consecutively, even a demon warlock with a high defense would have a headache. Now, Lakima had a headache. Chapter 307. Xueqi, who had frozen himself in the ice, was still standing there like an ice sculpture, but Lakima could hear the chanting of spells in unison. It was the same voice as Xueqi's. The chanting was so clear that Lakima could even hear every syllable. The question was, who was chanting? In the air, there were no people or mouths. There were only 108 hands of magic. The white elemental hands pushed the tricolored energy balls in their palms forward, and Lakima saw a storm forming. A storm of frost-fire arcane arrows. Each of his attacks had the power of a peak sky mage at full strength. It was the same as 108 peak sky mages attacking at the same time. Lakima's green face turned dark green. The huge and glamorous light spun at a high speed, crossed the sea, and pierced through the bodies of the demons who had been buffed by water float. In an instant, they were torn into pieces and fell into the sea like a rain of blood and flesh. Almost immediately, Lakima's demons were left with only the strongest apocalypse guards. These huge yellow-skinned demons flapped their long bat wings and withstood this round of attacks with some difficulty. Lakima raised his hand, and the huge apocalypse guards charged at Xueqi at a high speed. However, a second and third round of frostfire arrows poured down on the apocalypse guards. Lakima watched in shock as his demon army, which was enough to destroy an entire army of 5,000 humans, was beaten down by the storm of magic arrows released by the hands of magic. Xueqi ended ice barrier. Lakima's fear worked. Xueqi fell into a terrifying illusion like an idiot and spun around on the ice like a drunkard. Although his willpower was quite impressive, he recovered in a second. Logically speaking, a mage who was in a state of mental confusion could not continue to cast spells. But Xueqi did it. The 36 hands of magic formed a group to release frostfire arrows, never stopping from beginning to end, and automatically aimed at the enemy to pour fire. There was no problem with the accuracy. It was as if every frostfire arrow was controlled by a mage. Regardless of whether the Apocalypse Guard dodged or blocked, the frostfire arrow would automatically adjust its angle and accurately hit the Apocalypse Guard's weak spot. At this moment, Lakima almost suspected that Xueqi had done the same thing as him, enslaving a group of mages and using their souls to cast spells for him. Unfortunately, there was no time for Lakima to hesitate. He gritted his teeth and unleashed all the curses and negative spells he had stored on the totem pole on Xueqi. Xueqi's Crown of Ice magic circuit spun rapidly, instantly activating rapid cooldown. This gave Xueqi the capital to activate Ice Barrier again. The powerful ice element once again drove away all the curses. Then, "You finished casting instant curses? His magic power was depleted? Pray then, damn the greenskins. Here comes the punishment of destruction." Along with Xueqi's angry roar, the 10 arcane circuits, the 100 arcane circuits, and the entire arcane throne magic circuit rumbled. How many times did the massive arcane energy circulate in a second in the magic circuit? How many times did the explosive energy that was akin to a nuclear generator increase? Xueqi had already lost count. As if responding to the rage of the morning star Xueqi, the sky suddenly turned dark. Dark clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. A dazzling purplish-blue light burst forth from Xueqi's body. This light was so glaring that Lakima could barely open his eyes. This was the top-grade metamagic ability, Arcane Energy Storm. It was a powerful attack that overloaded the entire arcane circuit and increased the energy consumption by 50%. Without hesitation, Lakima summoned 20 Voidwalkers in one go. Then, with a wave of his hands, he sacrificed all of them to form a huge protective shield around his body. Lakima was very clear that even an entire group of wizards would not be able to break through the huge protective shield that he had sacrificed 40 precious soul fragments to create. In theory, this was impossible. Even the two powerful wizards that he had discovered in South Shore that day, Kel, Thuzad and Krasis, could not do it. Now, Xueqi gave him a feeling that he could kill him in one blow. Lakima really wanted to summon another demon hound to harass Xueqi, but he could not do it. The arcane energy that exploded from Xueqi's body was so strong that it actually started to repel the existence of all the other elements in this area. The space became unstable. To a demon warlock who relied on summoning demons for a living, this was definitely a nightmare. "No!" Suddenly ripping the necklace off his neck, Lakima roared, "Fools! I order you to stop him." The badge of the royal family of storm mages on Duke's robe shone brightly under the light of the arcane spell. The enslaved souls seemed to have regained their sanity for a short moment. They roared angrily and then rejected Rakama's order. Circles of arcane light shrunk back into Xueqi's right palm. The strange shrinking feeling was like a giant balloon shrinking to the size of a palm. Lakima instinctively felt that something was wrong. He really wanted to do something to Xueqi, but unfortunately, whether it was his shadow arrow or scorching pain, none of his attacks could directly break through Xueqi's ice barrier. Finally, Xueqi blasted out that attack. He did not know if this was the 7-layered frostfire arrow, or the 7-layered arcane impact, that was infused with ice and fire elements. A terrifying red, white, and blue magic energy ball that was twice the size of a carriage burst out from Xueqi's hand. It instantly evaporated the ice in front of him and the sea water near Lakima. The sailors and officers of the First Fleet who had not left the battlefield, the Empress Dowager Theon, Dylan, and the Orc Sword Saint Samuro, all stopped fighting at the same time and watched the unforgettable scene on the surface of the sea. A white line visible to the naked eye appeared on the surface of the sea in the distance. The white line was not long, only a few dozen meters long. However, it split to the left and right, forming a horrifying deep valley that almost reached the coral reefs at the bottom of the bay. It was only a few meters away from the bottom of the sea. The deep valley was at least 30 to 40 meters wide. On both sides of the deep valley were two parallel waterfalls that were repelled by powerful magic. "Damn it!" Just a little bit more and it would be the legendary Ocean Division. Everyone's eyes widened, and they forgot to breathe. Time seemed to have frozen at this moment. Until Lakama, who was fighting with Duque, turned into ashes, until the huge cylindrical valley was once again covered by the seawater, time seemed to have returned to normal. Chapter 308. The magic battle left all the onlookers dumbfounded. Although they had already sensed the power of this orc warlock, no one knew that their own alliance deputy commander was not easy to deal with either. For a moment, Kultira's fleet was filled with cheers. Samuro retreated. The opponent's king was quite difficult to deal with. He could not kill the king, and the king could not do anything to him. It had to be said that the king's fighting style was quite novel. He actually threw out barrels of explosives from their expensive space storage bags and detonated them with muskets. The violent large-scale explosion was indeed a big problem for a sword saint with high attack speed like Samuro. Samuro was also injured. Since he could not take it down, Samuro retreated. He had a better target, Duque, who had just used all his strength to kill Lakama Sharktooth. Duke Marcus, recognized as the strongest enemy in the eyes of the orcs. His original titles of Schemer and Sage were all removed. After this battle, there was only one label for Duque, and that was strong. Just like how there was a famous general above the fierce general and the wise general. In the eyes of all the orcs, Duque was the most worthy human to be hunted. He was like the brightest pearl on the crown. Samuro did not even look back and threw an arrow at Duque, who was bending over and panting. For a moment, Duque thought he might die again. At this time, Daylin made his move. He slowly slashed out the scimitar in his right hand. There was no powerful sword aura, nor the shocking power that could split the sea. It was like an ordinary captain waving his sword and ordering the entire ship to open fire. For a moment, Duque thought he would hear the loud but actually useless sound of cannonballs. But there was none. Instead, behind Samuro's high-speed forward body, a huge green ghost ship appeared in the void at high speed. Ghost ship? In this fantastical world, ghosts were not rare. Duque's Karazhan also had a ghost pet called Khadgar. However, this huge specter ship, which was made up of strange negative energy that was close to dark energy, did not have a physical body in the real sense. It was like a phantom that was purely used to scare people. It flew out of the void at high speed and crashed into the back of Samuro, who was also rapidly hiding and dodging outwards. There was a loud sound like a balloon exploding, and then it disappeared. It didn't seem to be of any use. A few seconds later, Duque was shocked to see Samuro fall into the sea. This was an orc sword saint hero with an indomitable will. Could it be that he could steal the kill? Magar! Duque was about to summon the Murloc Prophet to finish him off, but he suddenly realized that Samuro had just fallen into the sea and was rescued by another sword saint orc. Without even turning his head, he used the wave-like subtle steps to run away from Duque. F***CK. This young master's reputation. Duque didn't know what the system notification meant for Kull Dyla's reputation and Dellen's affection. Anyway, Duque didn't mind doing it if he could gain some reputation in the Alliance. Arcane Energy Storm was indeed a move for risking his life. It wasn't something a human could do to overload an already powerful arcane circuit. The chaotic energy was hot and crazy. Duque felt a stabbing pain all over his body, and he couldn't even walk. Unable to act cool anymore, Duque could only wait for Kull Dylas to send someone to save him. At first, Duque thought that he could only stand on the ice and wait for 5 minutes. Unexpectedly, a beautiful golden-haired female high elf came. She used Flash continuously and landed next to Duque lightly and gracefully. "You're Lady Golden Sword?" Duque recognized her as the female mage who often stayed by Dellen's side. Gina Golden Sword nodded slightly at Duque. "Come." Duque immediately sensed that the surrounding frost elements were stirring. Asterisk whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk theoretically, Gina was continuously casting icicles, but Duque felt like he was sitting on a hovercraft. The ice beneath his feet was the boat, and the icicles behind him were the driving force. After being around for so long, Duque finally realized that high-ranked mages could continuously cast icicles and use them as a blower. Looking at Gina Goldensword, Duque really wanted to say, "This is my knee for today. Please keep it." Thanks to Kull Dyla's court archmage, Duque boarded Dellin's messy flagship in just 3 minutes. Leaning on his machete, Delin smiled at Duque. I haven't exercised in a long time. Fortunately, my skills haven't deteriorated. But that orc sword saint is quite powerful. If I were 5 years older, I might die for my country. Gina Goldensword glared at Delin. At this moment, the roar of cannons came from afar. Obviously, the ships that had gone to stop the orc transport fleet had engaged in battle. Let's go over too. If there's anything, let's finish this damn war first. Dellin's words made Duque shudder. From what Duque could tell, Delin was not planning to let go of his old friend from the Bloodsail fleet. Duque gritted his teeth. The Alliance will not let go of any human enemy. Similarly, the Alliance will not mistreat anyone who contributes to the Alliance. This meant that Duque was prepared to protect Duke Fairville to the death. Sigh. Delin sighed as he patted Duque's shoulder. Duque, I'm not that inflexible. In the face of the threat of the human race's destruction, my personal grudges are nothing. All I want to say is that you don't understand Fairville. Duque suddenly understood. The people who understood you the most were not your family or friends, but your enemies. This was a strange feeling. Duque could not guess what it was, nor did he have the time to guess. The Horde's frenzy had arrived once again. If they did not want the entire northern continent to be flooded by the green tide, they had to first use their naval advantage to weaken the beastmen as much as possible on the surface. A considerable number of male Nagas were arranged to help Duque count the beastmen's warships in the Baladine Bay. The numbers were shocking. There were more than 25,000 transport ships of all sizes. More than half of them were empty ships used as pretenses. There were no more than 10 beastmen laborers, and no other beastmen. Even so, there were at least 100,000 laborers in order to control more than 10,000 empty ships. Only the Horde, where human lives were as cheap as ants, would do such a thing. Just as Duque was on Dellin's warship and following Kurtiris's first fleet to join the battle, a shocking piece of news arrived. The transport ships that rushed out of the Baladine Bay did not all go to South Shore. Instead, they split into 3 groups. About 40% went west, and were expected to land on the South Flow coast. 40% went in the direction of South Shore. The remaining 20% went into the long strait between the northern and southern continents. Duque shuddered. The thing he was most worried about had happened. The beastmen had split up. Chapter 309. Every battleship roared, their cannons flashing with dazzling yellow light. As the huge solid cannonballs were fired, thick smoke rose into the air. Accompanied by a deafening roar, the barrels of the cannons were pushed back violently. Black arcs of light traversed hundreds of meters in the air and bombarded the transport ships. The continuous explosions of cannonballs tore through the air, completely drowning out the roaring sea breeze. Dragging the black arcs of light behind them, the metal balls dancing in the air became unmistakable emissaries of death. Cannonballs were like grim reapers who placed human lives on a scale. The difference was that one side was luck, and the other side was death. Whether it was a huge splash that brushed past one's body, or whether it was a direct hit and one was killed in the sea, this was like a metaphysical game. In a sense, being killed by a cannonball was also a kind of luck. At least they did not have to endure this endless torture. The cannonball flew above their heads and fell beside them, creating huge splashes of water. Missed? In less than 2 seconds after the explosion, a new round of horrifying roars was approaching from afar. Did they pray to their ancestors? After drinking the blood of unknown origins and turning their skin green, would their ancestors still bless them? Unknowingly, these seemingly endless cannonballs had become the greatest torture for the orcs. If this was the first time they were fighting on the sea, perhaps the orcs would be dumbfounded and would just paddle the boat forward. But with the first disastrous defeat and the shadow of the landing battle looming over them, the surviving orcs inevitably began to panic. As a paddling ship, the most terrifying thing was that the 2 sides of the ship were not uniform. The direct result of this was the ship spinning around on the sea like a blind fly. The orc fleet was in chaos. It was not that there were no orc commanders who tried to organize small boats to attack the Alliance's fleet, but after Kurtiris's fleet suffered a huge loss last time, the orc transport ships were no longer blocked by a single row of careless and weak ships. Instead, they were blocked by 2 rows of ships. Not only that, the deranged General Daylin had also changed the structure of half of the fleet. Originally, For the sake of the cannonball battle between fleets, Kurtiras's fleet had basically distributed the cannons on the left and right sides equally. Now, considering that they would have to take part in the most brutal battle after the artillery bombardment, Dai Lin moved almost all the cannons to the starboard side. The port side relied on the ballast to maintain the balance of the ship. In other words, as long as the Alliance's fleet could not gain the upper hand and seize the T position, the port side, which only had a few cannons left, would basically be defeated the moment they encountered the enemy. Dai Lin was bold but careful. On one hand, he didn't think that the Bloodsail fleet that had surrendered to the orcs would have much fighting power. On the other hand, he was confident in his commanding skills. Now he had made the right bet. Even an ordinary destroyer could have more than 30 cannons on one side. This kind of firepower was simply crazy. The spherical cannonball spun in the air, and like the punishment of God, it ruthlessly flew towards the small orc transport ship that was trying to rely on its agility to execute the ant-encirclement tactic. Boom! Because of the rush, the materials used in the new batch of transport ships were mostly skimped on. Originally, the Beastman's ships were thick and hard. Now, because of the lack of materials and the excessive pursuit of quantity, even the hardness was gone. Logically speaking, it was impossible for a seemingly huge transport ship to be blasted from the deck to the bottom of the ship by a cannonball. But reality was right in front of them. The coarse and thin deck was easily blasted into the sky, mixed with the broken pieces of wood and orc flesh, splattering in all directions like a storm. There was no need to rely on the explosion of gunpowder, nor was there any need to use the spiral drilling force created by the rifling. Just the pure and violent kinetic energy alone was enough to send a transport ship that could carry dozens or even hundreds of people to the bottom of the sea. The scourge of skimping on materials had also spread to the orcs' giant ironclad transport ships. Originally, with the thick and heavy armor, the cannonball wouldn't be able to cause any substantial damage even if it didn't ricochet. But after the armor was thinned, the pig iron plates that weren't official armor became the biggest killer. The more brittle pig iron was instantly shattered into thumb-sized pieces after being hit by the cannonball, and they splattered into the hold of the ship with the impact of the cannonball. The orc warriors, who were crammed into the hold of the ship like sardines, became the biggest victims. Under this kind of shrapnel attack that exceeded the limits of their physical endurance, large numbers of orcs were killed like wheat being harvested. But most of them were heavily injured and unable to continue fighting. If it was on a land battlefield, the violent and brave orcs would usually choose to perish together with their enemy. However, this was the sea. Other than their own people, there were only the bowl-sized bullet marks left by the stray bullets in the ship's cabins within a radius of a dozen meters. Sitting on Dai Lin's ship, listening to the information sent by the various mages, Xueqi's expression was still as calm as still water. There's good news and bad news. Dai Lin pursed his lips. A man at sea always starts with the bad news. All right, the bad news is that you have to decide how to distribute the fleet now. If you let more than 8,000 transport ships land on the South Stream coast, Tarinas and Xeon will immediately come to kill you. And the good news. At this rate, we have a chance to let more than half of the orcs sink to the bottom of the sea to feed the fishes. Dai Lin whistled. I'll leave the Second Fleet and Storm Fleet at South Shore for you to deploy. Leave those that pass through the straits, and I'll pull the rest to the other side of the South Stream coast. Xueqi pondered for a moment. Dai Lin still refused to let go of the Heartsail pirates, so this was the only way. Promise me. Don't worry, I'll treat them fairly, even if they're forced to kill my Third Fleet. Xueqi stared at Dai Lin for a moment and finally nodded. On the battlefield, the opportunity was fleeting. There was no time to hesitate. The situation here was also reflected in the command center of South Shore. Lothar gritted his teeth and looked at Lang. General Lang, can I give you the best defense line in South Shore? Lang looked at his childhood friend. Lothar's battle in the past year was still vivid in his mind. Lang patted Lothar's shoulder. I'm not a child who has been on the battlefield for the first time. If such a good defense can be penetrated, I'd rather die. No, I don't want you to die, Lang punched Lothar in the chest. Go. General Lothar. The Alliance needs you. Without further hesitation, Lothar called out to Turalyon. Let's go. Our destination is the South Stream coast. With almost all of his cavalry, Lothar had to reach the Shadowfang citadel before the horde landed. The cruelest battle was about to begin. Chapter 310. At first glance, The attack on South Shore was shockingly similar to the Battle of South Shore the year before. In fact, when Xueqi received the banner of the tribe, Xueqi really looked down on the attacking tribes. Simply put, none of them were in the top 10. At first, Xueqi thought that hanging Blackhand's head would at least attract Blackhand's two brainless sons, Red Blackhand. None. There wasn't even a well-known tribe. The chiefs of the smaller tribes who were loyal to the former chief paid the price for their ignorance. They were all used as pawns by Orgrim to feign an attack. No Death Knights, no ogres, no warlocks. Xueqi could imagine that no matter how many of these fools there were, they would not be able to win against South Shore, which had been fortified for more than a year. Do not underestimate the difference between the top 10 tribes and the tribes below, and do not think that the combat power of the orcs was similar. Why was it that the higher-ranked tribes were, the better they were at fighting? Only the most powerful tribes could occupy the best territory and the fattest herds. On the other hand, because of the good territory, they could afford to raise more warriors and tribesmen. This situation was like a rolling snowball. Unless they lost a lot of long-range warriors, it would be difficult for them to decline. Generally speaking, the official warriors of the top 10 tribes, even the females, were rarely less than 2 meters tall. However, the warriors of the tribes below were at most 10% or 20% stronger than the orc laborers. On the morning of the 29th of March, the second battle of South Shore began. Xueqi's face was ashen. It was not because South Shore's defense line was tight. On the contrary, it was impregnable. Lang, the general of the army, still had the time to chat with Xueqi. What made Xueqi angry was that Lothar had taken away almost all the elites of the alliance. Those who were left in South Shore were basically infantrymen. There were 80,000 soldiers from Stormwind, 30,000 infantrymen from Lordaeron, Xueqi's new Storm Mage Legion, and the disorganized Lordaeron's 3rd Cavalry Regiment with only 1,500 cavalrymen. All the other elites, including High Lord Mograine, had been transferred to the south and north stream coasts. How could Lothar do this to me? Didn't I repeatedly tell him not to bet so easily? Before we confirm Orgrim's flag, we can't bet our elites. Xueqi lost his temper. Lang was slightly stunned. I'm confident that I can defend South Shore. I don't think there's anything wrong with Anduin pulling the other elites away. Also, when Terenas and Jane heard that there were 200,000 orcs heading that way, they were so worried that they sent at least 10 magic messages an hour. Xueqi slammed the table and said, "That's the key. I admit that the beast men wouldn't lie to us. But Orgrim was definitely a leader with brains. He didn't like sacrificing a lot in exchange for so-called glory." In Stormwind City, he was the one who suggested going around the east and north sides of Stormwind City. Xueqi didn't want to talk about the Battle of Stormwind City either. That was King Lang's eternal pain. Lang's handsome face twitched slightly, but he nodded. Indeed, from then on, I felt that the Horde's actions were often contradictory. One moment it was reckless, the next it was cautious. The reckless one was the mastermind. The cautious one was Orgrim, who was the deputy at the time. Indeed. This also explains why the first battle in South Shore happened. Lang frowned. So you're saying that the main force of the Horde was sent to the other side of the strait? No, those must be empty ships. Xueqi was very sure. Then, once these ships pass through the strait between the north and south, and pass under the Sodder Bridge, they will return to the northeast corner of the wetlands where they can land and carry the Horde over from there. Xueqi drew a line from the south to the north on the military map. The final destination was the east coast of the hinterlands. Seeing this line, Clayan, General Tom Seymours, and General Abendis all sucked in a breath of cold air. The cold air invaded their lungs, making them feel like they were spitting ice cubes out of their mouths and noses. Those who could get to the rank of general were all brainless boars. Of course, everyone knew what this meant. Due to the huge pressure that Lordaeron and King Terenas Menethil were about to face, Lothar had no choice but to withdraw most of the Alliance's army to deal with the Horde's frontal attack. If the Horde's main army ignored them, the orcs could march straight in and kill their way to Lordaeron's capital within a week, destroying this core kingdom of the Alliance. On the other hand, if they blocked the orcs from the front, the Horde would land in the hinterlands. In this area where the Alliance had no control at all, the Alliance would still collapse if the Horde was allowed to do as they pleased. In the hinterlands, the Horde could fully utilize their advantage in fighting in the mountains. If they headed west, they could directly attack Alterac, which was the weakest of the 7 human kingdoms of the Alliance. If everything went smoothly, They could also go around the hinterlands and earthy highlands, which even the orcs could not cross, and attack the earthy highlands instead. If they could destroy the defense of Sodder Bridge from the back, they could break through the land blockade of the northern and southern continents, and draw all the orc troops from the southern continent over. If they could deal with Alterac, there would be many options in front of the horde. They could attack the Stormwind refugee camp in Hillsbrad, or head west to attack the Dalagen. With Lothar withdrawing most of the main army, the horde would be able to move freely. The more Lang and the others watched, the more frightened they became. General Abendis raised a question. Deputy Commander-in-Chief, didn't you ask General Trobain to deploy a large number of catapults and ballistae along the strait? The strait is so narrow that even the horde's empty ships can't easily pass through, right? Duque pursed his lips and said after a long time, I know Orgrim. He must have a way to pass through the strait. Although I don't know why, I have already deployed my strongest long-range troops there. If the situation becomes critical, I will rush over with the Storm Royal family's mages. This was also the sorrow of a transmigrator. Did Duque not know what it was? Of course he knew. The problem was that after Medivh was possessed, Duque could use I can sense evil to explain a lot of things. However, Duke did not have enough evidence to convince the other parties of the Horde's next move. The alliance was not founded by Lothar and Duque. At the end of the day, the alliance was still a collection of kingdoms. Even if Duque had fought a beautiful battle to prove himself, he still could not use intuition or speculation to command every army in the alliance. I think this is a typical woodpecker tactic. While creating a diversion, they would drive the enemy to the place they wanted. Chapter 3:11. Looking at Duque's distressed expression, Lang understood. He patted Duque's shoulder. I believe in you. Believe in you. It was just a few simple words, but they were extremely heavy. This was not the trust of an ordinary person. This was the trust of a king with all the power of the kingdom. Lang used practical actions to show his support for Duque. Tom, I want you to use an elite regiment and a few new regiments to block the Horde's attack on South Shore. Can you do that? Under normal circumstances, General Seamus would definitely spit at this. Sending a rookie regiment to die was a task that could be easily won as long as the main force was deployed. This was a completely blind command. Seamus now understood that Lang was deliberately saving strength for the Battle of the Hinterlands that Duque had mentioned. Seamus nodded. I will withdraw the Griffin regiment as a reserve. Abendis was also very conflicted. He looked at Lang, then at Duque. Recalling all the miracles that Duque had done in the past, he felt a little helpless. All right, I will withdraw my elite regiment as well. Thank you. Duque quickly calculated. With the full support of Lang and Abendis, along with emergency support when necessary, it should be barely enough. Duque turned to his deputy, Windsor. Given that the Horde intends to send transport ships through the strait between the northern and southern continents, it is very likely that the Horde will launch an aerial attack on the southern defensive line of Stormguard. At the same time, if the transport ships pass through the strait, the Horde will launch a landing operation targeting the hinterlands. I hope that General Trollbane can consider the situation and send more support from Rapidsburg. The earthy highlands and the hinterlands were separated by high mountains, and there were many elemental creatures that ran around and attacked anyone they saw. It was quite troublesome to mobilize troops. Moving troops through the mountains was much more troublesome than moving troops by sea. If they wanted to mobilize troops, they could only do it now. It would be too late. Duque gave the order to Windsor, which meant that he was the Alliance's vice commander-in-chief. This kind of transfer order would not only be communicated through magic, but it would also be sent out by Griffin cavalry. It was the highest level of transfer order that the Alliance had decided internally. Salas Trollbane could choose not to listen out of selfishness, but if there was a problem, his Riptide Castle would cry. After Duque finished speaking, everyone was still worried. Using the Air Force to destroy the ground defense was very effective. It wasn't like everyone had never seen a Griffin before. The Griffin's attack power was also quite terrifying. The problem was that the Alliance didn't have many Griffins. There were only 200 to 300 Griffins in the Alliance combined, and they were usually used as scouts. No king would be willing to send Griffins into the battlefield. Moreover, how could the tribe have a large-scale air force? However, Duque had a confident expression on his face. Lang and the others were puzzled. However, they would soon find out. When they used their unparalleled art of war to repel several waves of orc attacks and replace their troops, something happened to the Solder Bridge defense line. From the distance, the Horde had entered the strait earlier, but Stromgard's defense line was set up with the Solder Bridge as the center. This caused the Riptide Castle army to enter the battle a step later than South Shore. Whoosh! The huge projectile vehicle used its long mechanical arm to throw a large basket of rocks the size of a human head at the Horde's transport ship in the center of the strait. The Horde's transport ship hadn't actually entered the firing range yet. Obviously, the Horde laborers inside were frightened, or for some other reason. A large number of transport ships stopped outside the firing range of the Riptide Castle's long-range weapons. Ha ha ha! I didn't expect the Horde to actually send transport ships. I thought this line of defense was wasted. The soldiers from Riptide Castle laughed loudly. During the time they guarded the Solder Bridge, the Riptide Castle people used a large number of ballistae, catapults and cannons, and actually trained batches of engineers, artillerymen, and ballistae who were very good at operating. This was an unexpected gain. After all, these people were originally just farmers. King Salas Trollbane was a man who knew his soldiers well. As the first human country to receive the attack report among the 6 northern kingdoms, King Salas had always attached great importance to the orcs. After receiving the official transfer order from Duque, Salas immediately agreed to Duque's request. He obeyed the transfer order and sent an integrated infantry regiment of 5,000 soldiers to Duque. In addition, he urgently mobilized a large number of ballistae and 5 archer companies to the Solder Bridge defense line, forming a deep formation to deal with the possible air attack. Air attack? What air attack? The Riptide Castle soldiers and generals were all confused. They just followed the order in a daze. According to the Alliance's deputy commander's order, all archers and ballistae had to be spread out. The same went for the ballistae. Before firing, the ballistae should be covered with a large number of branches and leaves to hide. What the hell was this? This completely subverted the military common sense of this era. Humans were not like the elves. Unless they were hunters or elites who had trained for more than 3 years, most human archers were terrible at shooting. Ordinary arrows would not be able to hit more than 20 meters away. Often, they could only rely on sharpshooters to lead the way and fire at a certain area on a large scale to make up for their lack of marksmanship. A scattered archer had no power to speak of. This was common knowledge in the military of the human race. Now, the archers of the Riptide Castle were scattered, carrying doubts. They were even more puzzled as to why most of the ballistae on the edge of the cliff were incomplete or broken, and a large number of straw men wearing the armor of the Riptide Castle soldiers. It did not take long for their doubts to be resolved. The Horde really had an air force. Look! Following the exclamation of an archer, countless people saw many black dots appear in the horizon against the rising sun. In just a few breaths, these black dots rapidly enlarged in their field of vision, turning into black flying birds with their wings spread wide. However, they were already so big even though they were so far away in the sky. One could only imagine their true size. Stay calm. Stay calm. Stay at your posts. Everything is within Deputy Commander Duque's expectations. For a moment, no one knew which officer shouted like this. Miraculously, the restless and panicked army quickly calmed down. Duke Marcus, a magical name. This name represented the bloody heads of more than 200,000 orcs, and also represented the Alliance's victory. Thinking of the previous strange arrangement, the soldiers suddenly realized that their commander had expected this. The soldiers did not have such a long-term vision. As long as they knew that this was a prepared battle, they would not panic so easily. Chapter 3:12. No soldier would dislike a commander-in-chief who always had the upper hand and could predict the enemy like a god. This meant a greater victory and a lesser sacrifice. Those terrifying shadows approached at high speed, swooping down from the clouds at high speed. Their huge bodies carried a terrifying aura. Before they could see the true faces of the attackers, a blazing aura had descended from the sky. The turbulence was full of the flames of death. As soon as it fell on the bait ballistae, not only did the huge ballistae instantly break into pieces, but even large areas of the surrounding area rose in flames. There seemed to be a distant roar from ancient times rising in everyone's heart. This sharp roar came from the distant history of the world of Azeroth, from the chaotic world that had yet to have human beings. This was the declaration of a terrifying existence that had been at the top of the entire world's food chain since ancient times. The terrible coercion from the higher creatures could easily push everyone's heart into darkness, destroying every remaining trace of reason in the depths of their hearts. Breathing stopped because of the terror. Their hearts forgot to relax after contracting into a ball due to extreme nervousness. Their blood surged in all directions due to fear. At the same time, his sight, hearing, taste, smell, and other senses of the body were all temporarily gone. Everyone was in a daze, almost forgetting themselves as they sank into a white fog. In a secret stronghold that had been rebuilt from a cave, a blonde figure was equally nervous. She unconsciously pressed her hands between her perky breasts. But very soon, her delicate face that had lost all color was flushed with excitement. Her eyes followed the huge figures moving at high speed. Like a hunter locking onto her prey, she stared closely at this scene, as if she was afraid to miss any tiny detail. It was hundreds of crimson flying dragons wreaking havoc on the torrential castle's position. They flapped their wings and stretched their necks, venting the flames of destruction on the whole land. Their huge golden eyes were like huge amber balls, and their black vertical pupils carried a unique coercion of higher creatures. She seemed to see their reluctance, resistance, and anger, but for some magical reason, they had to obey the command of the despicable and crude orc knights on their backs. Dragons were naturally arrogant, and it was hard to imagine that they would allow any creature to ride on their backs and act like a tyrant. Not to mention the orcs who had already made them show expressions of disgust. The situation was far beyond her expectations. Even though she was disgusted, even though she could not wait to turn her snake-like long neck and bite the dirty green skin on her back to death, every single dragon obeyed the orc's orders. Not a single dragon struggled to break free from the humiliating, saddle-like binding prop. What happened to the Red Dragon clan that defeated the Burning Legion 10,000 years ago? What was it that made the arrogant dragons submit to the puny orcs? Was it some kind of mysterious power? Her curiosity was about to explode. In another bunker, a beautiful woman with a face similar to the one just now, but more gorgeous and wilder, had the same question. However, she looked at the problem from a different angle. She paid more attention to the enemy itself. This group of red dragons looked terrifying, but fortunately, there were no real giant dragons among them. That's right. They had a lifespan of more than 1,000 years. When they truly grew up, their wingspans would easily exceed 10 meters. They would possess powerful magical abilities and a powerful body that surpassed other young dragons. They were the most terrifying existences. Although these red dragons in the sky looked very powerful, compared to a real giant dragon, they were far from it. Whether it was magical abilities, physical combat abilities, or intelligence. The beautiful woman, of course, was Aurelia Windrunner. The moment she received the news that the Horde's transport fleet had split up, she was forced to come here by Xueqi using the magic that she hated the most. Regarding this, Aurelia was a little angry. That terrible trip to space had left her in a daze. Now she knew why. She also understood why Xueqi repeatedly told her to just kill the enemy's cavalry. Damn it, that rascal Xueqi definitely knew something. Rascal, can't you just tell me directly? You're always so secretive. Aurelia spat angrily, hating a certain someone. Windrunner had a jumpy personality. As the most mature elder sister, Aurelia still cared about the big picture. She turned her head and looked at Alucia Barov, who had just been urgently transferred here today. Miss Barov, I'm counting on you. Alucia nodded calmly. Aurelia whistled, and the sound of the wind poured out. Are you ready? Savannah's voice came through the wind. Who do you think I am? That voice was like a proud warhorse that was ready to charge. Then let's go. The flames that the Red Dragon army spewed out were too much and too fierce. The entire area was covered in flames like a sea of fire. More torrents with blazing golden light descended from the sky, making the waves of the sea of fire rise higher and higher. Just then, over 100 elemental fluctuations attracted the attention of the Red Dragon army. Human magicians? In the sky, the chief of the Dragon Maw clan, Zulu Hid, who was riding the largest red dragon, narrowed his eyes. He let the red dragon under him hover in the air, trying to find those damn human magicians from the sky. In any case, human magicians were rare, and humans could threaten the dragon army. Not to mention an organized group of magicians. After Orgrim purged the Shadow Council, the Horde was indeed more united, and there was only one voice left. On the other hand, the horde was lacking in magicians. Almost every chieftain was ordered by Orgrim to prioritize killing the opposing mages. Zulu Hid was disappointed. Not a single human could be seen, let alone magicians. The humans who used to be incomparably arrogant had all turned into cowards. Humph! Zulu Hid called out, and one of his subordinates immediately lowered the red dragon mount and dove into the strait, raising a huge special war flag. That was the signal. The orc transport ships that had stopped outside the range of the catapults suddenly moved. The laborers rowed hard to get the transport ships moving again, trying to cross the strait faster. On the other side, at the southern end of Sodder Bridge, a group of orcs began to charge. They obviously wanted to use the cover of the Red Dragon army to kill their way over as soon as possible and open up the most convenient and fast way to invade. The horde's attack went smoothly. The sudden appearance of the Red Dragon suppressed all resistance from the humans, until an emerald arrow appeared. Chapter 313. No one knew where the green arrow had come from or where it was going. The arrow was like a wisp of cotton swept up by the wind. It was unbelievably light. It streaked across the sky above the scorched land, passed through the sea of fire, and finally floated dozens of meters in the air. It wasn't that no orc dragon riders noticed this strange green color. It was just that this green color was too harmless to humans and animals. But something strange happened. An orc riding on a red dragon launched a dive that had been done countless times. His target was the human camp to the north of Sodder Bridge. Even though the humans had all run away, as long as the ballistae and cannons fixed on the hilltop weren't destroyed, the humans could charge out of their bunkers and inflict heavy casualties on the orc army that was attacking the North Bridge again. At this time, that green color fused with the green color on the Beastman Dragoon's neck. An arrow pierced through. There was no more life. The orc's eyes widened. He didn't understand at all. Why did he die? When did he get attacked? The blood spurting out of his throat drew a long line of blood in the air because of the dragon's high speed. His vision darkened, and he fell from the dragon's back. Suddenly losing its controller, the young crimson dragon was at a loss. It quickly stopped its dragon breath. Dragon breath wasn't cabbage. It took a lot of energy for a giant dragon to use dragon breath. The continuous breaths just now had already made it hard for him to breathe. Now that the controller had been killed, he was happy to free himself. With a happy roar, he immediately flapped his wings and flew into the sky. Before receiving that order, he longed to breathe the air of freedom. This thought made him quickly leave the battlefield and fly to who knows where. This orc's unfortunate encounter attracted the attention of the Dragon Maw clan's orc dragon riders. They widened their bell-sized eyes and quickly moved their eyeballs, searching for the attack from the ground. This wasn't a single case. Soon, more green arrows flew into the sky. No one knew where they came from. They only knew that orcs were killed with one arrow after another. Where? Where is it? Who saw the enemy? Nope. Ah. Na-Zuzu is dead. Batu is also dead. The draconic roar beast men were in a state of panic. The destruction they had expected didn't happen. They didn't kill many humans, and they only burned a large pile of large military equipment that they thought was worthless. What was going on? The orcs began to fear the green color. They even pulled on the red dragon's reins when they saw it, causing the red dragon to ascend at a high speed. It was useless. Those green arrows were like ghosts, and they could actually coordinate with each other. For example, an orc saw an arrow flying towards him from his left. When he tried to dodge the arrow in a panic, an arrow silently came from his blind spot to his right and ended his life. After the 20th Beastman Dragon Rider was killed, no Beastman dared to ride a red dragon within 100 meters of the ground. At this moment, they suddenly realized that the flames on the ground had been extinguished. It wasn't that the flames couldn't burn any longer, but that the flames had been extinguished. An icy aura quickly spread across the land, and the rolling white mist covered every single flame, snuffing them out in the cold. As the cold air covered the land, a large group of slender green figures began to appear in the icy mist on the ground. Rangers of the High Elves. Zulud was extremely shocked. They actually let their precious mages use large-scale war magic to protect these elves? It had to be said that this was a genius idea. No longer restricted by the limited range and narrow field of vision, the range of the elves' arrows was greatly increased. This time, a total of 5 Beastman dragon riders were shot dead at a distance of about 150 meters from the ground. This is impossible. Zulud cried out in shock. This had completely surpassed the concept of bows and arrows, and it defied all so-called common sense. Using a delicate longbow to shoot down a giant dragon that was doing all sorts of evasive maneuvers 150 meters in the air was already very impressive. Not to mention the orc cavalrymen who were sitting on the giant dragon and couldn't be seen from the ground. What kind of terrifying and mysterious archery was this? It was completely unimaginable what kind of being could shoot such an arrow. Zulud's mind was filled with projectile monsters that were stronger than ogres. If he knew that the real archers were just 2 seemingly delicate blonde elven girls, he really didn't know how he would feel. In any case, not a single red dragon cavalryman dared to approach the ground. Even the lowest red dragon was 300 meters above the ground. Zulud cursed angrily. He stared at the transport ship that was about to enter the bottom of Solder Bridge and gritted his teeth. All right, at least I've escorted the transport ship over and completed the chief's mission. It was as if he was making the greatest mockery of Zulud and his Dragon Maw cavalry. At this moment, a pair of fearless humans rushed out of cover and ran towards an intact catapult that was placed on the edge of the cliff. It looked like they were going to use the catapult to finish off the transport ship in the strait. Zulud's lungs were about to explode. Dive. Use dragon breath to burn those guys to ashes. But what about the Elven Rangers? Every surviving Dragon Maw cavalry member felt a lingering fear. That patch of green had become a lingering shadow in their hearts. Come here. Zulud cast a spell at the closest Dragon Maw cavalry member. Immediately, that guy felt as if a small tornado was revolving around him. He was overjoyed. Wind Shield was a defensive spell of the shaman. It was a wind shield made from the power of nature and could defend against all kinds of arrows. The next moment, that guy rushed over. Not only him, there were also several other Dragon Maw cavalry members who were also buffed by Wind Shield. They drove their red dragons towards the humans and bombarded them. For the red dragons, a distance of 300 meters could be covered in 2 breaths. The green arrows were like the Grim Reaper, arriving at just the right time. As always, they were aimed at the orc cavalrymen's vitals, but they were stopped just before they were about to kill the orc cavalrymen. It seemed like they could break through the weak wind at any time, but the green arrows just couldn't get in no matter how hard they tried. This time, the green Grim Reaper let out a helpless sigh. No! Sylvanas cried out in alarm. Just a moment ago, she had proudly used the Whisper of the Wind to guarantee the safety of the torrential stronghold's ballistae. With my godly arrows, none of the Dragon Maw cavalry can hurt you. That was what she had said. But now, the opponent's shaman magic had mercilessly shattered her pride. Sylvanas was on the verge of tears. At this moment, a flash of white light appeared. Chapter 3:14. Wind Arrow. The unique skill of the Windrunner family. The heaven-defying Windrunner could make these arrows, which were as light as cotton wool, float along with the wind. Yes. Not shoot, not pierce but float. By locking on to the opponent's vital points in the wind, the arrow would float along the preset wind trajectory to its destination. The human body moved in the air, and every movement of the limbs had to expel the air near its destination. The movement of air was the wind. If one did not understand the law of the wind, or use something to break the law of the wind, then no matter how one dodged or how strong the wind was, the wind arrow would still hit its intended target. However, no matter what level of godly skill it was, it still crossed the boundary of skill and was included in the category of nature magic. Savannah's and Aurelia's wind arrow had always been successful. Even when facing orc warlocks, there was never a situation where they could not hit their target. Of course, it was a different matter if the opponent used a shield to block the attack. The wind arrow was indeed the nemesis of the Dragon Maw clan's dragon cavalry, who had almost no armor in order to reduce their weight. What the 2 Windrunner sisters did not expect was that in the Horde's camp, there was only one powerful shaman in the sky. Every qualified shaman was a master of nature magic. The Windrunner sisters' long-range magic arrows were completely countered by Zulud. It was not that the Windrunner sisters could not defeat Zulud. In the first place, this so-called duel had a very unfair premise: the giant dragon. Although he couldn't tell which dragon Zulud was riding, he could tell from the size of the red dragon that it was definitely more than 1,000 years old. It could take on a human form and cast a lot of magic. It was a true dragon in the truest sense of the word. The army was already at a disadvantage against the air force. They were completely defeated in terms of mobility, not to mention that Zulud was riding an adult red dragon that was the ruler of the sky. Zulud could easily defend and not attack, allowing the giant dragon to take care of anyone. With these two factors combined, the Windrunner sisters were at a great disadvantage, especially those brave torrential fort ballista gunners. Savannahs would not be able to forgive himself for a long time if those brave torrential fort ballista gunners were really burned to death. No! It was the same mournful cry that lingered for a long time. A ranger could be a sharp attacker, but unfortunately, a ranger could never be a protector like a paladin. Savannahs could only watch helplessly as the red dragon's flames descended upon those brave warriors who had summoned their courage to come out, only to face the flames of death helplessly and hopelessly. Savannahs didn't have any special feelings towards ordinary humans. However, for these people who bore her promise, if they died, it would undoubtedly be a mockery and destruction to the pride in Savannah's heart. Even Aurelia, who was not far away, bit her red lips. Perhaps this will destroy the trust humans have in us? In that instant, the Windrunner sisters felt their hearts wrench in pain. A streak of familiar white light saved those crossbow gunners, as well as the Windstalker's promise. Hand of Magic. It was this thing again. When a Hand of Magic played instant division from 1 to 2, then 2 to 4. Until there were 128, it might seem like just a magic trick. When 128 hands of magic cast Icicle at the same time, using 128 small ice whirlwinds to form a huge wall of ice, blocking the dragon breath of the 5 young red dragons. When the elements of ice and fire collided fiercely in midair, condensing into a gorgeous boundary line of ice and fire, Aurelia and Savannahs shouted the same name in infinite surprise at the same time. Duque! Duque, different ending notes, different lingering charm, and the same surprise. After shouting at the same time, the two sisters looked at each other from 50 meters away, which was rare. They both saw the embarrassment in each other's eyes, and then looked away at the same time. Well, no matter what, their promise was kept. A flash. In a sudden dazzling white light, Duque's figure suddenly appeared next to the panicked cannoneers. Duque smiled at them. Attack! Duke Marcus, the deputy commander of the Alliance, is with you. At this time, the panicked cannoneers all revealed ecstatic smiles. Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Commander. Oh my God! This is so happy. The high-ranking mage, the Duke of Stormwind, the extraordinary Deputy Commander of the Alliance of Lordaeron, Duque, is personally protecting us? Even though they saw it with their own eyes, the cannoneers still could not believe their eyes. If he could survive today, he would definitely brag to his descendants for the rest of their lives. Back then I, your grandfather, was protected by the magic of the Alliance's vice-commander. I survived the flames of the 5 red dragons, and I even braved the dragon's breath that could burn the earth to ashes to open fire at those damn orc transport ships. With joy and excitement, the cannoneers skillfully operated the cannons and roared at the transport ships in the center of the strait. Duque's appearance scared Zulud and his men. The red dragons climbed up one after another. Duque was a magic-type powerhouse who had just killed the Shadow Council's powerhouse, Lokama Sharktooth, so they could not be too careful. Chief, what do we do? The Dragon Roar Beast men asked Zulud. Don't go down. We can suppress them from the sky. As long as the transport ships pass, it will be our victory. Zulud was very clear-headed. A true archmage was indeed terrifying. However, no matter what kind of magic it was, it had a range. As long as there was enough distance, the magic that needed to fly to hit the target would not be able to do anything to the red dragons in the sky. What do we do? The Windrunner sisters, who had rushed to Duque's side, asked the same question. They could tell at a glance that Duque might be able to use magic to protect one or no more than 10 groups of cannoneers, but it was definitely not enough to face the Horde's army on the other side of the bridge and the Red Dragon cavalry in the sky. They had to get the troops from Torrent Fortress out of their bunkers as soon as possible and rebuild the line of defense on the north side of Sardal Bridge. The most important thing now was to get rid of those annoying orc dragon cavalry. The problem was that there were still over 100 controlled red dragons in the sky. As much as they did not want to admit it, Duque had undoubtedly become the Windrunner sisters' last hope. If they wanted to prove themselves and the strength of the High Elf Rangers, if they wanted to show off in front of everyone, it seemed that in the end, they still had to rely on Duque. Seeing that Duque did not answer immediately, the great demon Queen Aurelia began to tempt him. Come, little brother Duque, Help me think of a good way to get rid of those evil big lizards. I will repay you later. At this moment, Xueqi smiled. Can you guys fly? Ha! The Windrunner sisters were stunned. No way. Then let Big Brother Xueqi take you guys to show off and fly. Chapter 3:15. Fly. What a lofty name. Since the birth of humans, countless people had tried to break free from the shackles of gravity and fly into the sky. The world of Azeroth did not have the right brothers, but there were dwarves who sought death by building airplanes. Ahem, I've gone too far. Windrunner, in the world of rangers and even in the world of the High Elves, it represented the two extremes of wind and speed. However, there was a sad story called Windrunner Can't Really Ride the Wind and Fly into the Sky. No matter how many years passed, or even until the moment of their death, the Windrunner sisters would never forget the same question they asked their parents when they were young. Why can't Windrunner fly? Aurelia was the same. Sylvanas was the same. Sasha and Lilith were the same. Even though they were old, even though they knew that elves were not dragons and could not fly by nature. However, in the deepest part of their hearts, they still had the same dream, the same desire. Fly. Now, Xueqi actually said, bring them to show off, bring them to fly? The Windrunner sisters did not know what show-off was. But flying. As far as they knew, there was no spell in Azeroth that could allow people to truly fly. What are you going to do? Sylvanas' eyebrows moved, with some excitement and agitation. Humph. If I disappoint you, there will be serious consequences. Aurelia seemed to be very dignified and elegant, her left hand supporting her right elbow and her right hand supporting her chin. However, under that mature and steady appearance, a wild and passionate heart was beating. This was not the first day she knew Xueqi. Every time she met him, she would be intrigued by Xueqi's miracles. A human who always had countless new and interesting gadgets easily won the liking of the active Windrunner. Xueqi was like a wonderful book. The book was not thick, and it felt like it could be finished in one go. Who knew that as she read on, there would be new surprises every time. Her eyes moved, and the focus of her attention was only on Xueqi. Xueqi smiled mysteriously. I plan to do this. All of a sudden, 128 hands of magic raised their palms to the sky and shot frost arrows from all directions. No, it wasn't as simple as frost arrows. This was an icicle arrow hail that reduced damage in exchange for a higher shooting speed. The casting time of level 1 frost arrow was the shortest. With the support of various metamagic abilities, the casting time of each frost arrow was reduced to less than half a second. In a situation where there was no additional injection of ice elemental energy, it was just pieces of ice crystals that were shot into the sky. From afar, it looked like a fountain of ice and snow that kept spewing upward. Xueqi bowed elegantly. Beautiful Windrunner ladies, the splendid stage is ready. Aren't you going to go up and perform a wind dance? The emerald eyes of Aurelia and Sylvanas flickered with pleasant surprise. They completely understood that Xueqi wanted them to use the ice crystals as a springboard to jump into the air and attack. For mortals, this was definitely an incredible thing. Stepping on a flying ice prism to jump higher into the sky, then stepping on another even higher ice prism to jump up again, using the ice prism as leverage to jump more than 200 meters in the air, and then launching an attack on the orc cavalry on the back of the red dragon flying in the air. From the sound of it, this was simply wishful thinking and crazy courting death. For mortals, perhaps it was true. For the Windrunner, it was a different matter. In a sense, this was no different from what they did when they lightly shuttled through the tall forest, jumping from branch to branch. The only difference was the height, and whether Duke could provide them with enough ice prism pillars at the right places to use as leverage points. If a stranger had asked them to do this, the Windrunner sisters would have snorted. But he was Duke Marcus, a super-wise man, a miraculous man who used a magical ice ship to save 50,000 Storm elite soldiers. He didn't ask things like, "Can I trust you?" which spoiled the mood. Instead, it was the most mature and steady elder sister who issued a challenge to her younger sister. "Oh, my dear sister, do you want to compete?" The valiant Aurelia had a charming smile on her face as she raised the longbow in her hand, looking like a hunter who was about to hunt a turkey. "Oh, my beloved sister, how do you want to compete?" Queen Sylvanas, whose competitive spirit was completely aroused, curled her lips and returned a challenging smile. "Quantity. Of course, whoever gets the first prize will be number one." Aurelia glanced at Zulu Hid, who was at the highest point in the air. What about the stakes? Queen Sylvanas smirked. How about the loser calls Duque Big Brother 10 times? Among the 4 Windrunner sisters, even the youngest Lilith was over 1,000 years old. Although the Windrunner family was not so particular about etiquette and seniority, it was still embarrassing for them to call a young man less than 20 years old Big Brother. Before Aurelia could agree, Duque answered first. Okay. Aurelia rolled her eyes at Duque, who was trying to take advantage of her, and finally nodded almost imperceptibly. The 2 sisters didn't say what the prize for the winner was. It was simple. For the Windrunner who loved the wind and freedom, flying was the best prize. In the next second, the 2 beautiful figures disappeared. Amidst the whooshing sound of the ice crystals shooting up into the sky, there was a faint sound of collision. Every ice crystal that deviated from its predetermined trajectory was accompanied by a vigorous green figure, whose figure was almost invisible to the naked eye. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Clear laughter, hearty laughter. Enough to make people dream. The laughter of the Windrunner sisters grew louder and louder with the ice crystal fountain until it rose nearly 300 meters into the sky. The seemingly random ice crystals could not hit the flying red dragon, but they had enough footholds for the Windrunner sisters to close the distance between them and the dragon riders. This allowed them to display their magnificent and explosive archery skills. Dance of 3 arrows. It was a knight-errant archery skill that shot 3 rounds of arrows in a short period of time. In the hands of the Windrunner sisters, this skill became a godly skill that could shoot 3 arrows at a time and shoot 9 arrows in 3 rounds. Stepping on the ice prism that was less than the size of an adult's palm, Aurelia bent her beautiful waist backward in order to find an angle to shoot. Under the force of her waist and abdomen, the seductive mermaid line was clearly visible. It was obviously an extremely high speed, and it was obvious that she dodged the red dragon's breath by a hair's breadth. But the moment before shooting, Aurelia fell into a state of extreme stillness. Chapter 3:16. The red dragons crisscrossing sharp teeth, the orcs' open mouths when they roared, and the dragon riders' bloodshot eyes were reflected in Aurelia's emerald eyes. Whoosh! The sound of sharp arrows gliding. Faced with the Windrunner's archery, even the great shaman's nature's protection could only sigh helplessly and hopelessly. 2 arrows broke the windshield. 1 arrow hit the face. The result of 3 rounds of 9 arrows was that 3 dragon riders lost their lives forever. Their sinful bodies fell from the sky and died without a complete corpse. No! Zulu Sid was so angry that his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Kill them! Go tear them apart! The Dragon Maw orcs' throats were almost hoarse from shouting. Driven by them, the red dragons showed their fierceness as the overlords of the sky. They pounced quickly and violently, with a large area of scorching dragon breath. Everything was chasing the 2 ghostly green figures. But no matter what, they couldn't catch up. This situation was completely unacceptable to the Dragon Maw orcs. The elven rangers who couldn't fly used the ice prisms to make all kinds of godly dodges in the air. Even the most imaginative orcs couldn't imagine such a situation. But the other party not only thought of it, but also did it. Duque's cooperation with the Windrunner sisters could be said to be flawless. Whether they wanted to speed up or turn in the air, when they needed it most, in the most ideal place, there would be an ice prism flying out of nowhere just right. The hands of magic floating 100 meters in the air would certainly not disappoint and shoot the ice prism more than 100 meters into the sky to the most perfect place. There was no need for words, no need for hints. Duque did all this perfectly with the help of the system. Aurelia and Queen Sylvanas were pleasantly surprised. No, ecstatic. They didn't know that Duque's system determined all their movement trajectories, the enemy's attack routes, and possible dodging routes. All Duque had to do was to let the hands of magic shoot the ice prism in the desired route. They were just very excited. So there is someone in the world who can get along with me so well? Could this be the legendary telepathy, our hearts are connected as one's heart? In any case, at first glance, the Windrunner sisters seemed to be flying. With agility that surpassed griffins and even giant dragons, it flapped its wings, twisted its body, and soared in the air at an altitude of 300 meters. Zulu Hid was about to go crazy. The draconic beastman was terrified. Some of the dragon riders began to urge their giant dragons to climb higher into the sky in order to gain a moment of peace. There were also some dragon riders who crazily dived towards Xueqi, who was controlling the ice fountain, only to be killed by the arrows of the elven rangers who had been waiting for a long time. Whether Zulud was willing to admit it or not, the Red Dragon army, which had been chased out of the battlefield, had not played its role at all. At this moment, the Orc army had almost reached the northern sniping point of Solder Bridge, and the transport ships had almost reached the bottom of the bridge. At this moment, by Xueqi's side were nearly 10,000 torrential fortress soldiers who had long since returned to their posts. They cheered and shouted, "Long live Xueqi," or "Long live the Alliance." With more complete heavy ordnance, they rained down a deathly rain of stones, ballistae, and cannonballs on the tribe. As always, a rain of flesh and blood rained down on the bridge. Orc corpses and broken limbs that had been sent flying by the huge stones fell from the side of the bridge like dumplings. As some of the ordnance had been destroyed by the dragon's breath, it was impossible to completely seal off the strait. But for every transport ship to pass through, at least 2 ships had to be sunk. Looking at the miserable state of the army, at the draconic beastman cavalry beside him, and then at the Windrunner sisters who had dominated the mid-low altitudes and were unstoppable, Zuluhid's eyes were bloodshot. Retreat! The chief of the Dragonmaw clan had used up almost all his courage to shout this word. It was easy to make the orcs attack, but it required supreme courage to make the orcs retreat. This was because he would have to bear the scorn of other clans and the disdain of almost the entire tribe. Zuluhid had no other choice. A red dragon that could be used as a mount was too precious, especially when he realized that the red dragons that had escaped from the battlefield were all flying towards the north. He had a deep sense of foreboding. As long as that thing was here, there should be no need to worry that the red dragons that had escaped would not return. But he had a premonition that these abominable lizards would never return. This anxiety almost drove Zuluhid crazy. The Red Dragon army, which should have been killing everything in its path, had retreated like stray dogs with their tails between their legs. The entire sky echoed with the laughter of the Windrunner sisters. This was flying, that they had not dared to imagine for thousands of years. Fighting against the noble overlords of the sky, the dragons, and killing the filthy and ugly orcs in the high altitudes that they had never touched before. Was there anything more wonderful than this for the Windrunner sisters? Even the mature and steady Aurelia could not help but laugh from the bottom of her heart. Their emerald green knee-high boots tapped lightly on the ice prism that was constantly descending. The Windrunner sisters were like fairies descending from the sky, jumping down step by step. "Yo, beautiful elven girls, are you looking for a husband? Goddess, I love you." The generals and soldiers from Torrential Fortress gave the warmest cheers to the 2 female elven rangers who were flying in the sky. Aurelia combed her long blonde hair that had been messed up by the wind so that she could return to the image of a dignified ranger in the shortest time possible. Queen Sylvanas, on the other hand, proudly stood with her hands on her hips, forming a graceful S-shaped curve as she accepted the cheers of thousands of soldiers. Although the Windrunner sisters had killed the most enemies, the focus of the sisters' attention was on Xueqi. They knew very well that without Xueqi, they would not have been able to create such a miracle. Before thanking Xueqi, it was better to settle some things first. "My beloved sister, how are the results?" 68. Aurelia held her head high and chest out, inadvertently making the pair of Hygel peaks even more alluring. Sylvanas was taken aback. "What's wrong? My good sister, did you lose?" Aurelia had the happy smile of a big sister who had successfully consolidated her position. Queen Sylvanas shrugged and spread out her hands. "I did not lose. You won? How much?" Aurelia's senses were very sharp. She was very sure that her sister's kill count should not be higher than hers. Queen Sylvanas sighed. "I did not win either. I also got 68. A trace of disappointment and joy flashed in Aurelia's eyes. She was disappointed because she could not establish a strong position as the big sister. She was happy because her sister's skills were not inferior to hers. Chapter 317. Okay, then it's a draw. Aurelia also put her hands on her hips. "No, we both lost." Sylvanas smiled slyly. Her crescent moon-like smiling eyes gave Aurelia a bad feeling. "My dear sister, have you forgotten the Windrunner's family motto? A Windrunner must be the best ranger. If he can't hunt the best prey, then it's a failure." "Failure? Oh, that's too bad. What's worse is that if she failed, wouldn't she have to call Xueqi a good brother?" Damn it! Aurelia really couldn't bring herself to ask an almost immortal, thousands of years old high elf to call a human youth brother. Not to mention that there were over 10,000 pairs of eyes looking at her from time to time. The feeling of being watched by tens of thousands of people made Aurelia's scalp tingle. On the other hand, rather than saying it was the Windrunner's family motto, it was more of the pride of being a strong person, and she couldn't deny it. If she didn't do her best, then she lost. If she didn't hunt the best prey, then she lost. He should have admitted defeat cleanly. But Xueqi, only Xueqi. Aurelia didn't want to call him brother. Somehow, Aurelia subconsciously felt that once she called him brother, she would break some kind of taboo, and it would make their already vague relationship even more dangerous. Even if Aurelia didn't want to admit it, she had to admit that her attention was attracted by Xueqi. His schemes, his wisdom, and his endless new ideas made her, who loved new things, crazy. She was afraid. Afraid that as an immortal, she would fall in love with a human who was as bright as a firework but had a short life. For the high elves who had almost endless lifespans, decades seemed to pass in a moment, and this time was often the lifetime of a human. The lifespan of a human was really too short. So short that any high elf couldn't stand it. After decades of passion and love, there would be hundreds or even thousands of years of loneliness. And the only reason that could make Aurelia build a line of defense in her heart was age. A 15-year-old human youth should be a baby to the elves who were thousands of years old. However, her attention was always attracted by Xueqi. Worst of all, her hateful sister seemed to have seen through this, and would not let it go, and used it to tease her. It was obvious that what Servanas was doing now was a classic example of, he would rather work hard than let his big sister escape. Oh, my good sister, don't you always tell us to watch our words and keep our promises? It's also an important part of fulfilling a promise. Queen Sylvie smiled faintly. Demon King Aurelia pursed her lips and said nothing. He had made a mistake. He had only agreed because the great Demon King had absolute confidence in his skills. Who would have thought that his sister would grow to such an extent? Now that he thought about it, it had indeed been a long time since he had fought or hunted with Sylvanas. Furthermore, there had been very few opportunities in the past 10 years, especially after this mischievous second sister had become Quel Salus's wage thief. Come to think of it, in the Battle of South Shore, she had deliberately held back, right? Aurelia finally realized that she had been tricked by her sister. Biting her bright red lips, Aurelia finally raised her head and stared at the gazes from all directions. In fact, it was her illusion. The human warriors were basically busy wiping out the orcs on the bridge. Yes, we did lose. But I have the right to pay later. Haha, you said you lost the bet. You're so hesitant to pay the bill. Then I'll pay the bill first, okay? Queen Sylvie giggled. Seeing her sister embarrassed, Queen Sylvie was very happy. Here, the sisters were fighting, and Xueqi was the winner. Even though he knew that Queen Sylvie was deliberately flirting with his big sister, Xueqi still felt very happy. Queen Sylvie. That was the famous Queen Sylvie, who was worshipped and feared by millions of people in the future. Even if it was not from her heart, Queen Sylvie did indeed lean over. Her left hand was on Xueqi's left shoulder, and her right hand was gently stroking Xueqi's stiff neck. Her red lips were close to Xueqi's ears. She looked provocatively at the Demon King Aurelia, and spoke in a sweet tone that no one had ever seen before. Good brother. Good brother. Good brother. Without pause, every word was affectionate, and the ending of each word was deliberately lengthened for the sake of sexiness. Listening to her, Xueqi's body was numb, and the pleasure of having an electric shock almost made Xueqi lose his ability to think. Let's not talk about the reactions of those around who noticed this scene. Just by looking at Aurelia, one could see that the great Demon King was already dumbfounded. This heroine, who had become famous since the beginning of the Troll War, had killed thousands of trolls without blinking an eye, and had always been a dignified and steady great Demon King in front of outsiders. At this moment, there was shock and embarrassment on her face. For some reason, seeing Servanas leaning on Xueqi and hearing her call him good brother in a shameful tone, Aurelia felt a fever all over her body. Her skin was burning hot. Staring at her sister's delicate face, which was 80% similar to hers, she felt as if Aurelia had leaned on Xueqi and flattered Xueqi in a shameless tone. It was as if there were countless eyes staring at her from all directions. The shameful chord in Aurelia's heart finally broke. Ah! The dignified Ranger General, the big sister of the Windrunner family, Aurelia, who was secretly admired by countless men, screamed like a little girl and ran away without looking back. Ha ha ha. Interesting. So interesting. Big sister, who asked you to lecture us with a serious face all day? Ha ha ha. I'm dying of laughter. Queen Sylvanas, who had finally succeeded in her evil plan, held her twitching waist and laughed so hard that she almost lost control. After laughing for a full 3 minutes, Queen Sylvanas reluctantly stopped. She suddenly looked at Xueqi, who was at a loss, and said, I was just teasing my big sister. If you think that I, Sylvanas, am interested in you, then I'm really sorry. Sorry? Who would apologize like this? Feeling the sharp pain from the soft flesh on his waist, Xueqi's tears were about to come out. Sylvanas, this bastard, in order to draw a clear line between her and him, actually gave him a hard hit on the soft flesh on his waist. That poor piece of flesh was almost twisted 360 degrees by her 2 slender fingers. Ah! The bitter Xueqi screamed because of the pain, but he was interrupted by Queen Sylvanas quickly covering his mouth. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.